Chapter 21, The Dilemma. Atticus Blaine understood the concerns weighing heavily on Professor McGonagall's mind. He didn't respond immediately, but instead took a moment to reflect in silence. After a while, he lifted his head and met Professor McGonagall's stern gaze with calm resolve. "The crux of the matter is making trade-offs, Professor," Atticus began. Professor McGonagall pursed her lips, her sharp mind unable to predict what Atticus would say next. "Choice," Atticus continued. "We are all aware of the crisis Hogwarts is currently facing. None of us want to see it come to a tragic end. However, if the current dire situation isn't alleviated even—" He paused, catching the flicker of uncertainty in Professor McGonagall's eagle-like eyes. "Even if the heir to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets remains hidden, the petrification of 2 young wizards won't be the last of these events. More attacks are inevitable. Professor McGonagall, can you guarantee that the consequences will only be petrification?" Professor McGonagall's eyes flickered, and her breathing grew heavy. "Though the reality is harsh and cruel, we must confront it. Escaping won't solve anything," Atticus stated rationally. "I don't understand why the one lurking in the shadows hasn't simply killed Colin Creevey and Justin Finch Fletchley. Perhaps they enjoy the thrill of instilling fear without taking a life. But, Professor McGonagall, do you really want to rely on the mercy of our enemies?" "I understand, Atticus." Professor McGonagall's voice wavered as she spoke. The mention of kill caused her thin frame to tremble. She blew her nose, and her tough exterior began to crumble. "Dumbledore hasn't said anything, but I can see he's worried about the situation you described. However, Atticus, we are not the Ministry of Magic. We don't have the authority to. The rights and freedoms we cherish pale in comparison to the value of a noble life," Atticus interrupted, raising his voice. "I understand the school's concerns. I can imagine the backlash if the students, their families, or the public knew Hogwarts was monitoring their every move. But I don't think it matters. If our actions can save even one child's life, then no matter how much criticism the school faces, it will be worth it." Professor McGonagall fell silent, her heart heavy with conflict. Her long-held beliefs clashed fiercely with the clear logic in her mind. "If I were to follow my initial thought, Professor McGonagall," Atticus said, rubbing his stomach, feeling a bit hungry, "I would gather everyone in the school into the Great Hall, use legilimency or veritaserum on each person in the foyer, and if they pass, send them to the courtyard. Perhaps in less than a day, we could resolve this matter." "Absolutely not!" Professor McGonagall exclaimed, jolted by Atticus's extreme proposal. She immediately rejected the idea. "This would be a grave violation of the law, Atticus. If we did this, Hogwarts might have to close before the heir even makes a move." Atticus shrugged with an innocent expression. "It was just a thought, Professor. I had no intention of actually implementing it." Professor McGonagall was finally convinced, albeit reluctantly. Unless she could devise an effective plan by the next semester, the countless corridors, towers, and courtyards of Hogwarts Castle would remain vulnerable. Strengthening patrols was impractical, and who could say that prefects and professors wouldn't be targeted? If such a situation arose, it wasn't just the young wizards who would be at risk. Few in the school could handle such danger, with enough strength. "Try to keep it secret, Atticus," Professor McGonagall advised, choosing her words carefully. "Especially those from Gryffindor House. They tend to be more adventurous." Atticus Blaine nodded in response, and Professor McGonagall pursed her lips, as if she hadn't fully realized how troublesome some of the young wizards in Gryffindor could be. "Would you like to join me for dinner, Professor McGonagall?" Atticus asked, feeling buoyant now that the matter was settled. He extended an invitation to her for lunch in the Great Hall. "No, thank you. I have quite a few things to attend to. I'll have the house elves prepare something for me later," Professor McGonagall replied, standing up as she watched Atticus head towards the door. Just before he reached it, she seemed to remember something and quickly called him back. Atticus turned, puzzled. Professor McGonagall, usually so decisive, seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something that just occurred to me, Atticus. I haven't had the chance to consult with Headmaster Dumbledore yet, but perhaps you could help." Atticus blinked, intrigued. What could possibly make the usually resolute Professor McGonagall so uncertain? "Have you ever heard of Gilderoy Lockhart?" she asked, her expression a mix of annoyance and helplessness. If you mean the best-selling author. Atticus replied in surprise. Yes, I've heard of him, Professor. His books are quite famous. I've seen people reading about his thrilling adventures all over Europe. I've read them myself. They're quite entertaining. Are you asking if I can get his autograph? That's not quite it. Professor McGonagall shook her head vigorously, as if trying to dispel a bothersome thought. He's currently teaching at our school, invited by Headmaster Dumbledore. Oh, Atticus exclaimed, his eyes widening. It seemed Professor McGonagall wasn't fond of the celebrity author. I bet he's quite popular with the young wizards. So? Well, Professor McGonagall hesitated, not one to speak ill of her colleagues. However, as the deputy headmistress, she felt responsible for the quality of education at Hogwarts. Professor Lockhart may have some experience in writing books, but he doesn't seem particularly adept at teaching. You see, Atticus, the second half of the 5th year is crucial with the OWLS exams, and the 7th year students have the NEWTs. These are vital for the students' futures. Several have told me they aren't gaining any real help or improvement from Professor Lockhart, so I was thinking. Professor McGonagall looked at Atticus expectantly. I was considering getting him an assistant, Atticus frowned. His primary mission at Hogwarts was to locate the Chamber of Secrets and secure the Slytherin legacy within. This required him to monitor the students closely, observing those who behaved unusually. Being a professor's assistant would mean leaving his post during the day, which conflicted with his plans. If you're willing, I could discuss it with Headmaster Dumbledore and arrange for compensation equivalent to an official professor's salary. It's not like you to try and bribe me with money, Professor McGonagall. Atticus thought, though he asked earnestly, I wouldn't have to grade homework, would I? By the way, what subject does Professor Lockhart teach? Sorry, I'm not very good at divination. Wait, did Professor Kettleburn retire? Not divination or care of magical creatures, Atticus. Professor McGonagall replied with a rare, cautious look. Well, it's defense against the dark arts. Boom. Atticus turned, startled by the revelation. Atticus Blaine turned swiftly, his movements a blur of urgency. With a decisive motion, he slammed the door shut behind him. Sorry, goodbye, he called out, his voice echoing in the hallway as he hurried away. End of this chapter. Chapter 22. Behaving Strangely. Rumors that Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts class was cursed by a mysterious figure are not without basis. During the years Atticus Blaine studied at Hogwarts, he never witnessed a defense against the dark arts professor, leaving the school unscathed after their one-year tenure. Many professors transitioned seamlessly from Hogwarts to St. Mungo's Hospital, earning money here and seeking medical attention there without delay. Although Professor McGonagall only invited Atticus to be a teaching assistant, it didn't mean there was no risk. Atticus was not keen on using his hard-earned money to boost St. Mungo's performance. The preparatory work was mostly complete, but this did not mean Atticus had nothing to do. During the week Mr. Bands prepared the panoramic telescope, Atticus needed to reacquaint himself with the castle. Remote areas that wouldn't affect the lives and teaching of young wizards and professors needed to be closed off as soon as possible. Additionally, he had to design specific monitoring layout points according to the castle's architectural structure, creating a surveillance network without blind spots. In his plan, all activity areas, except for classrooms, the common rooms of the 4 houses, the dormitories of the young wizards, and private spaces like men's and women's bathrooms, needed to be monitored. Although it wasn't difficult for him to add a sound monitoring function to the panoramic telescope, he realized this would be excessive and likely unacceptable to most professors, so he abandoned the idea after careful consideration. Hagrid, you must be hiding something. A sudden shout from the other end of the corridor interrupted Atticus's thoughts. As far as he knew, very few students stayed at the school during the Christmas break. Stop asking nonsense, Harry and Ron, a rough voice replied impatiently. I'm not hiding any secrets. Harry, Ron, and Hagrid? Atticus raised an eyebrow and looked from a distance. Was that crisp voice Harry Potter's? Was he finally going to meet the chosen one of this world? Atticus's heart beat faster with curiosity and anticipation. You know, Hagrid, your eyes dart around when you lie. Harry and Ron pressed closely behind Hagrid, questioning him. You just said you would go to Principal Dumbledore to ask about Blaine's role as the Ministry of Magic's investigator, but when you went upstairs, you suddenly changed your mind. Why, Hagrid? Besides, you look very scared, Ron pointed out sharply. An investigator from the Ministry of Magic? Atticus scratched his head, puzzled. When had he ever said that? Why can't you be honest, Hagrid? Two figures trailed behind a massive silhouette at the other end of the corridor, quickly approaching the middle. Harry continued to chatter, trying to persuade Hagrid to reveal the secret, as his keen intuition told him Hagrid was hiding something significant. Hello, Harry. Ron noticed Atticus first. He tugged on Harry's robe and whispered, Look over there. Who is that man? Hagrid suddenly stopped, causing Harry, who hadn't reacted in time, to bump his head into Hagrid's waist, where a hard dragon leather belt seemed to be fastened, causing his nose considerable discomfort. Why did you stop all of a sudden, Hagrid? Harry muttered, rubbing his crooked nose in dissatisfaction. Did you change your mind again? Hagrid didn't respond. His expression was intriguing. The face behind his bushy beard, weathered by years of sun exposure, turned extremely pale the moment he noticed Atticus. Beads of sweat glistened on Atticus Blaine's forehead, and his large hands were conspicuously absent from view. And Fang fumbled around his upper body, as if ensuring his attire was in order. Blaine, is that you? Hagrid managed a strained smile, his unease evident as he glanced at Atticus, whose expression was inscrutable. Stammering, Hagrid continued, It's been a while. I heard you're working for the Ministry of Magic now. Congratulations on landing a good job. Hagrid had served as the gamekeeper at Hogwarts for decades, witnessing countless young wizards graduate. In terms of tenure, even the heads of the 4 major houses couldn't rival him. Naturally, Atticus was well aware of Hagrid, though they shared no real friendship. Their only significant interaction had been 5 years prior, when, under Dumbledore's guidance, they revisited the site of a battle with a dark witch. Beyond that, their exchanges were limited to polite greetings in passing. Despite the lack of camaraderie, there was no animosity between them. So why did Hagrid seem so perturbed by Atticus's return to the school as an investigator? Atticus was deeply puzzled. It's been a long time, Mr. Hagrid, Atticus replied, momentarily setting aside his curiosity about Hagrid's odd behavior. His gaze shifted to the freckled boy standing beside Hagrid, whom he recognized instantly. The boy's red hair was unmistakable, identical to that of Bill and Charlie Weasley. Atticus noticed a hint of apprehension in Ron's eyes, which was understandable. It was typical for a 13 or 14-year-old wizard to feel uneasy around unfamiliar adults. However, what puzzled Atticus was the mix of longing and fear he detected in Ron's gaze. Perhaps the Weasley boy had heard tales of Atticus besting his older brothers? Just as Atticus was about to smile and greet Ron, a thin boy with striking green eyes and untidy hair emerged from behind Hagrid. The boy's eyes met Atticus's, and in that instant, without warning, Atticus's mind went blank, as if struck by a bolt of lightning. The shock was so intense that he nearly lost his balance. "Oh!" Hagrid exclaimed, rushing forward to steady Atticus. "What's wrong, Atticus? You look like you've been hit with a stunning spell." Behind Hagrid, Harry and Ron exchanged furtive glances, both sensing the surprise in each other's eyes. This was the same Slytherin senior who had once repelled a formidable dark wizard during his 5th year, alongside Dumbledore. Why did this formidable figure now appear so vulnerable? "Thank you, Hagrid," Atticus said, regaining his composure. "I might have woken up too early and got dizzy from the cold wind. Could you ease up on my shoulders? I feel like my shoulder blades are about to snap." He rubbed his temples gently, processing the sudden influx of information in his mind. After a moment, Atticus felt more at ease. His expression returned to normal as he smiled at the young wizard, whom Professor Snape had described as arrogant, conceited, clever, and proud. His eyes finally settled on the lightning-shaped scar on the boy's forehead. "I believe I've had the pleasure of meeting the famous Harry Potter?" Since entering the wizarding world, Harry had grown accustomed to strangers showing interest in his scar. However, knowing that Atticus had been sent to Hogwarts to investigate the Chamber of Secrets attacks and was rumored to be the prime candidate for the heir of Slytherin made Harry uneasy. It was as if the man standing before him was a living embodiment of the rumors that haunted him. In the next moment, the man would likely pull out a pair of handcuffs and restrain him. But no, that's what Muggle police would do. Wizards typically opt to confiscate the wand of the offender first. "Hello, Mr. Blaine. You are not mistaken," the man said. Atticus Blaine's piercing gaze made Harry feel uneasy. Instinctively, he leaned towards Hagrid for reassurance. However, recalling Hagrid's less-than-stellar track record, Harry's initial sense of security quickly evaporated. Hagrid's massive presence, instead of comforting him, only added to his discomfort. End of this chapter. Chapter 23. Lost Things. "Say something, Harry." Atticus Blaine, Hagrid, and Harry were all lost in their thoughts, and the silence was making Ron anxious. He glanced curiously at Atticus, then shot Harry a furtive wink, trying to break the tension. It was Atticus who finally broke the silence. He nodded at Harry and offered a warm smile. "Last night, I stayed with Professor Snape, and he shared his thoughts about you." Harry's heart seemed to be gripped by a cold, unyielding hand, sending a chill through his entire body. He didn't need to ask to know what kind of evaluation Snape might have given. Nervously, Harry clenched his fists, searching for words to defend himself. But Atticus's next words pulled him back from the brink of fear. "Of course, those evaluations are just Professor Snape's personal opinions and may not be objective. I believe that to truly understand someone, you must observe them with your own eyes, or it's unwise to blindly accept others' opinions." Harry's tense shoulders relaxed, as if he were a drowning man finally breathing fresh air. Atticus, observing the nervous young wizard, smiled inwardly, understanding why Harry Potter seemed so reserved around him. Normally, Atticus might have teased him further, but a pressing thought had just crossed his mind, urging him to confirm a few things. "By the way, Hagrid, I forgot to mention that it wasn't the Ministry of Magic that commissioned me to investigate the Chamber of Secrets, but the Hogwarts Board of Trustees." He exchanged a few words with the huddled Hagrid, and then quickly departed. His steps hurried. As he reached the corner of the stairs, Atticus waved to Hagrid, who stood above, before disappearing from view. Once Atticus's footsteps faded completely, the three at the stairs exhaled in unison. Ron couldn't contain himself any longer. "He's scary, isn't he?" Ron's ears were red with excitement. "When he looked at me, it felt like facing Dumbledore. He seems friendly, but you don't dare to show it." "He's really different," Harry agreed, still shocked. He recalled Atticus's distinctive eyes and compared them to Dumbledore's penetrating gaze, trying to weigh them against each other. "I never thought a Slytherin-born wizard could be so polite, instead of being glib or sarcastic. Right, Hagrid?" Perhaps because Atticus hadn't questioned him, Harry's morning anxiety dissipated, leaving him feeling exhilarated. With his worries gone, his curiosity surged. "Mr. Blaine was just here, Hagrid. If you have questions, why not ask him?" Hagrid didn't respond immediately. His cheeks puffed out as he stared blankly at the stairway corner, looking as if he'd swallowed a dead mouse. "Aha! A wonderful misunderstanding!" he exclaimed suddenly, startling Harry and Ron. Before they could voice their confusion, Hagrid beamed. "I see. It's the school board, not the Ministry of Magic. They probably just want to handle it." "What are you talking about, Hagrid?" Harry and Ron exchanged puzzled glances. Ron frowned, asking, "Do you have to be so mysterious?" "I told you, Ron." Hagrid waved a finger cheerfully. "I have nothing to hide from you. Sorry, Harry. I have to go back now. Fang is still at home waiting for me to feed him, and I don't want him tearing down my bed." As Atticus Blaine passed by the foyer, he paused to glance into the auditorium. Professor Snape seemed to have left for home, while Professor McGonagall was still busy in her small office. The auditorium was empty, except for two young Slytherin students at their dining table, engrossed in their meal and oblivious to Atticus's presence. Their hearty appetite made Atticus rub his own belly, but he chose not to join them. Instead, he headed directly into the basement passageway. For 7 years, Atticus had navigated these labyrinthine, dimly lit underground corridors. Even after 3 years away, the path was etched in his memory, guiding him effortlessly. "Oh, I've forgotten the password!" he exclaimed, arriving at a dark brown stone wall and patting his head in frustration. He faced two options: wait for someone to pass by, or return to the auditorium to seek help from the young Slytherins. After a brief moment of contemplation, he decided on a third option. Glory, Atticus muttered to the stone wall, but nothing happened. Well, that's not it. Let me think. Holy Family? Still, the wall remained unmoved. With a frown, he tried several more guesses until he finally ventured, Pure blood? With a satisfying click, the stone door swung open. Ah, the same old routine. Atticus chuckled, pleased with his cleverness. He stepped through the wall and surveyed the Slytherin common room. Nestled deep underground and adjacent to the Black Lake, the room exuded an eerie green glow, with a faint scent of water and grass lingering in the air. Even the crackling fireplace couldn't dispel its mysterious and foreboding atmosphere. I thought it would be 2 hours before I saw you all return. A lazy voice drawled from a high-backed chair facing away from the door. The voice, still tinged with the awkwardness of adolescence, sounded particularly grating. Did you finally manage to destroy Hogwarts? I presume you must be Draco Malfoy, Atticus replied. Clang! At the sound of Atticus's voice, Draco dropped his quill and, in an instant, leaped behind a nearby sofa, wand in hand. Who are you, and how did you get in here? He demanded. Atticus's eyelids flickered slightly, impressed by the swift reaction of the blonde, gray-eyed young wizard. No need to worry, Mr. Malfoy, he said calmly, ignoring the wand pointed at him. My name is Atticus Blaine. May I sit down and talk, Mr. Malfoy? 20 minutes later, after Atticus had explained his background, Draco's eyes gleamed with interest. He raised his chin, scrutinizing Atticus as if assessing a potential ally. My father sent you here? You know he's one of the 12 board members of this school. It's odd. I thought he'd try to oust old Dumbledore, but instead, he sent you? Atticus was unfazed by the arrogance of young Mr. Malfoy. As a former Slytherin himself, he was well acquainted with the demeanor of pure-blood family scions. However, the notion of Lucius Malfoy plotting to remove Dumbledore was intriguing. Could this be why he opposed the Greengrass family in the vote, fearing repercussions? By the way, since you're the investigator, Draco continued, his curiosity piqued. Draco Malfoy's pale face flushed suddenly, as if he had just recalled something significant. The esteemed Potter of Gryffindor is none other than the legendary Harry Potter. Surely, you've heard of him, Malfoy exclaimed, standing up with excitement and fixing his wide eyes on Atticus Blaine. What authority do you possess, Blaine, to expel a student? If you can help me get him expelled, my father would reward you handsomely. Atticus, accustomed to Malfoy's arrogant demeanor, leaned back comfortably in his chair, maintaining a calm tone. If I understand correctly, Mr. Malfoy, are you suggesting that Harry Potter is the heir of Slytherin? I didn't say that, Malfoy muttered softly, oblivious to the fact that Atticus was no longer smiling. How could a self-important fool who associates with mudbloods be connected to the great Slytherin? Atticus's expression shifted slightly. Draco Malfoy had a distinct personality, even among the pure-blood wizard descendants. However, what does that matter? Malfoy suddenly turned, waving his arms in frustration. Blaine, I just need Potter out of the school. If you need an excuse, well, I can tell you, he's a parseltongue. Surely you know what that implies. What? Atticus sat up straight, his eyes flickering with interest. Snape hadn't mentioned this to him the previous night. Given that all the young wizards in Slytherin were aware of this news, it seemed unlikely that Snape wouldn't know. You've certainly shared something intriguing, Mr. Malfoy, Atticus acknowledged with a nod. However, I regret to inform you that I lack the authority to expel students. Moreover, unless it's confirmed who attacked Creevey and Finlay, I won't RICO. Remember that Headmaster Dumbledore, expel him. You weren't sent by my father. Malfoy's face turned cold as he realized the man before him wasn't an ally. Then what are you doing here? Malfoy sneered. Do you think I opened the Chamber of Secrets and want to send me to Azkaban? Actually, it's quite embarrassing, Atticus replied with a smile, standing up. When I was a student here, I seemed to have hidden something in the dormitory, but for some reason, I forgot about it. It only came to mind just now, after a little provocation. Thank you for the 300 favorites. End of this chapter. Chapter 24. Fate. After realizing that his commands had no effect on Atticus Blaine, Malfoy's eyes turned cold. He had no desire to converse with him. He simply wanted to return and finish his letter. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, when Blaine, bearing the title of investigator, politely bid him farewell and headed towards the dormitory, Malfoy found himself trailing behind. "I have to keep an eye on you, Blaine, in case anyone discovers missing valuables when school starts." Malfoy sneered, his voice dripping with suspicion. "I can't vouch for a man of unknown origin." "Your concern is quite reasonable, Mr. Malfoy. Please, feel free to be my witness," Atticus replied, nodding as he dismissed Malfoy's hostility. The dormitory buildings of each house had many vacant rooms. Whenever a young wizard graduated, the dormitory they had occupied for 7 years would become available. However, these rooms might remain unused for a couple of years until new students arrived. "This is my dormitory," Blaine announced as he stopped in front of a door, causing Draco's face to darken with irritation. "Oh, is that so?" Atticus raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "What a fortunate coincidence. It saves me the trouble of using force to open the door. So, Mr. Malfoy, would you kindly open it for me?" Reluctantly, Malfoy complied, his curiosity piqued by what might be hidden inside. He eyed Atticus suspiciously, threatening, "If you break anything, you'll pay for it." The dormitory had changed since Atticus's school days, though the bed's position remained the same. He stood at the entrance, analyzing the room before moving towards the window. Outside, the black lake shimmered with silver-green waves, offering a breathtaking view. Atticus hadn't lived there initially, but since the Christmas holidays of his 5th year, he had been persuaded by his roommates to move in. The current occupant seemed quite affluent. Atticus noticed the latest Nimbus broomstick leaning against the bed, and the bedding was not the standard issue from the school. It was crafted from gold silk and filled with the finest velvet. "Ah, this looks truly regal," Atticus mused, examining the exquisite items near the bed. Turning to Malfoy, whose expression had darkened further, he realized the answer to his unspoken question. "It seems we are quite destined to meet, Mr. Malfoy." "I can tell you're a fraud," Malfoy declared, his voice firm. "I've slept in this bed for nearly 2 years and never noticed anything amiss." "Perhaps you haven't been observant enough, Mr. Malfoy," Atticus replied, aware of Malfoy's disdain. He didn't intend to linger. Picking up the broomstick, he tossed it to Malfoy and gestured for him to stay by the door. "You think I'm here to steal your belongings?" "Not at all," Atticus assured him, drawing his wand from his sleeve. "To ensure that the important items I left here aren't mistakenly taken, I took precautions. It might get a bit noisy, but rest assured, Mr. Malfoy, I promise on my life that you'll remain safe." With his wand in hand, Atticus approached Malfoy's luxurious bed. He focused on the rough stone wall, counting from the window side to the 7th brick, then fixated on the gap between the 7th and 8th bricks. Immediately afterward, Atticus Blaine waved his magic wand, moving the bedside table aside. His gaze shifted to the floor, where he counted 7 bricks from the inside out, aligning perfectly with 1/3 of the bed's head. Squatting down, he swiped his wand across his arm, causing steaming red blood to spray onto the dark blue floor tiles. "What are you doing?" Malfoy asked, frowning in disgust as he approached slowly. "The magic you use to protect things looks like black magic." After healing his wound, Atticus focused intently on the ground. The blood on the bluestone bricks writhed strangely, influenced by some unseen force as it seeped underground. Soon, it vanished entirely, and a small, pale golden snake emerged from the center of the stone brick, its head held high. "Don't speak so unparing. Professionally, Mr. Malfoy," Atticus teased, pleased that his protective magic was intact. "It might make me think you're not a Slytherin student." "All right, Mr. Malfoy," he continued, "if you don't want to wait outside, prepare yourself. You might be startled by what's inside." Malfoy wanted to retort, but the words stuck in his throat. He suddenly sensed an unsettling aura around Atticus Blaine, but his pride wouldn't let him show fear. After a moment's hesitation, he remained rooted to the spot. Ignoring Malfoy, Atticus pointed his wand at the golden snake. As he chanted a spell, the air thickened with magic, and the dim room grew even darker. The golden snake flicked its tongue and stretched its body, slithering swiftly around the stone brick's edge like a shadow. It returned to its original position, gradually fading until it disappeared. After a series of intricate maneuvers, a stream of light flashed across the dark blue stone brick. The brick then pivoted outward along a central crack, revealing a 2-foot-deep black hole. The room remained silent for a few seconds, and Malfoy, unable to contain his curiosity, leaned over to peer inside. Upon seeing the small object on the stone box at the bottom of the hole, Malfoy's expression froze momentarily before he sneered. "So, the big commotion you mentioned was for a fist-sized spider?" he mocked. "And it looks like it's dead, Blaine. Was this a pet from your school days? Did you go to all this trouble to find it a burial place?" "I disagree, Mr. Malfoy. I believe the spider is alive," Atticus replied calmly, staring at the motionless spider on the stone box lid. He stepped back, adding, "It might just need some stimulation after being in the dark for so long." With that, Atticus pointed his wand at the spider, conjuring a gentle breeze. As the wind brushed over the spider's bristly legs, it suddenly sprang to life. Its ugly head rose, and its 8 green eyes spun wildly. "See? It works," Atticus said. Before Malfoy could respond, the spider's 8 legs unfurled with astonishing agility. Its fist-sized body leaped to the ceiling, and in a blur, the 8-eyed spider, imprisoned for 4 or 5 years, returned to its original size. Boom! As the 8-eyed spider landed, the dormitory shook violently, as if... The sky seemed to collapse as the massive creature descended, crushing the 2 beds in the center of the room into splinters. Click, click, click! The 8-eyed spider, imprisoned by Atticus Blaine for 5 or 6 years, frantically wiggled its mouthparts. If it could speak, Atticus was certain it would curse his ancestors to the 18th generation. The spider, fueled by a surge of violence and anger, could not remain silent in its newfound freedom. Its 2 enormous black pincers waved menacingly in the air, supported by 6 slender legs bristling with coarse hair. The creature rampaged through the room, leaving destruction in its wake. Soon, nothing remained intact except for Malfoy's bed. Finally, the enraged spider drove all 6 of its legs into the solid rock wall, perching under the ceiling on the opposite side of the room. It glared down at Atticus with its 8 eyes, the very person who had subjected it to inhumane torment. Its mouth opened wide in a ferocious display, ready for a desperate confrontation. "Hey, long time no see, little buy-in," Atticus called out, waving his wand with his right hand. "It's good to see you're still so lively." "What have you done?" Malfoy, who had somehow ended up paralyzed on the floor, stared at Atticus in a daze, his voice a sleepy murmur. Suddenly, his pale face flushed with color, and he sprang to his feet as if struck by lightning. He roared at Atticus, "How dare you keep something like this next to my bed, Blaine? I'm going to tell my father about all of this. You'd better pack up and leave by tomorrow. P.S. It's a new week, so please show your support." End of this chapter. Chapter 25. The Polite Malfoy. In the face of Draco Malfoy's impotent rage, Atticus Blaine remained calm. He shrugged innocently, turned to Malfoy, and said, "What a shame. I thought you'd find it cute. Who in their right mind would consider this terrifying, dangerous, and ugly creature cute?" Malfoy wanted to retort, but the 8-eyed spider, which had imagined countless times the sweet revenge it would exact, lacked the patience to wait for him to speak. It noticed that the powerful wizard who had imprisoned it was momentarily distracted. Sensing a perfect opportunity for a sneak attack, it lunged forward. The sound of the spider's massive body, as large as a cart horse, slicing through the air was terrifying. Malfoy's pupils contracted, and time seemed to slow down. He opened his mouth to warn Atticus, but his lips moved so sluggishly that he feared he wouldn't utter a word before being crushed by the spider. Just when Malfoy thought he was doomed, Atticus, seemingly unaware, suddenly turned and raised his wand. The tip glowed faintly, and he swung it down with the precision of chopping wood. In the dimly lit room, a black wall of light, as delicate as cicada wings, appeared. It was like an incredibly sharp blade positioned between them and the charging spider. The emerald green light in the spider's 8 compound eyes shifted subtly. Sensing danger, it tried to wedge its slender limbs into the wall to halt its momentum. But the force of its leap was too great, and it couldn't overcome the inertia of its massive body. In desperation, it shielded itself with its 2 large black mandibles, hoping to mitigate the damage. With a resounding crash, the spider's body split in 2, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Green viscera, intestines, and body fluids scattered across the floor. Malfoy stood behind the milky white shield conjured by Atticus, staring blankly at the bisected spider. The fading clicks of its mandibles sounded like a mournful wail, causing Malfoy's legs to tremble involuntarily. "Sorry, Mr. Malfoy, I've made a mess of your dormitory, but don't worry, I'll clean it up for you," Atticus said apologetically as he dispelled the magical shield. He approached the spider's corpse, ignoring the lingering malice in its green eyes, and fiddled with its mouth parts as if searching for something. After a moment, he sighed with regret. "I forgot. I've already collected the venom. It seems that lack of food and exercise slows the recovery of an eight-eyed spider's venom." Malfoy shuddered violently. He averted his gaze, feeling as if he were lamenting over having eaten too many biscuits at afternoon tea, which had left Atticus with no appetite for dinner. For the first time, he truly understood what fear and strength meant. "What kind of magic was that?" Malfoy asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to steady it. "What?" Atticus looked up, momentarily puzzled. "The magic you just used, the one that killed this beast, the spider." "Oh," Atticus resumed his search for valuable organs, replying casually, "I haven't named it yet, Mr. Malfoy. If you'd like, you can have the honor of naming it." "Huh!" He stood up, disappointed. Atticus Blaine approached the stone box, but he didn't rush to open it. Instead, he rummaged through the space bag he carried, searching for something specific. After a few seconds, he retrieved a box containing a dark green glass bottle filled with a colored potion. Hiss! As soon as the seemingly unremarkable stone box came into contact with the potion, a foul-smelling white smoke billowed out, as if the potion had been vaporized by an extremely high temperature. Noticing Malfoy's body trembling violently once more, Atticus kindly explained, "I've cast a tracking spell and applied a highly poisonous potion to the box. If you touch it carelessly, you'll find yourself in big trouble." Malfoy thought to himself, is it really necessary to apply a tracking spell when there's already a highly poisonous potion? However, he didn't dare voice his thoughts. "All right," Atticus said, picking up the stone box. His tone relaxed as he surveyed the chaos around him. With a vigorous wave of his wand, the collapsed beds and cabinets, reduced to sawdust, leapt back to their original positions. Broken personal items reassembled in midair, feathers returned to cushions and bedding, and damaged books repaired themselves and neatly returned to their places. The magic lamp on the ceiling shimmered once more, and the green blood splattered on the wizard's robe and sweater, transformed into a writhing liquid figure, twisting and stuffing itself back into the belly of the eight-eyed spider. Atticus waved his wand again, and the spider's corpse dissipated into a puff of smoke. In the blink of an eye, the dormitory was clean and comfortable again. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Malfoy," Atticus said cheerfully, tucking the box under his arm. "I trust you won't mind keeping today's events a secret, will you?" Malfoy, looking stiff, nodded mechanically. "I'll keep it a secret for you, Mr. Blaine." "Thank you," Atticus nodded politely, then turned and left. Draco Malfoy stood beside his bed, dazed and unmoving. He looked around at the familiar dormitory. What had just happened left no trace. It was as if it had all been a dream. 10 minutes later, he suddenly remembered something, and his pale cheeks flushed red. He dashed out of the dormitory, hurried down the spiral staircase, and entered the mansion's lounge in a few swift steps. Atticus had already left. The room was still empty. Malfoy ran to the table by the fireplace, where a half-written letter lay quietly. He grabbed the letter, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it into the fireplace. As the flames rose, Malfoy took out a clean piece of parchment from his school bag and leaned over his desk to begin writing again. As night fell, Atticus stood at the door of a long unused classroom on the 3rd floor. This room served as the office Professor McGonagall had arranged for him, as well as his bedroom during his tenure at Hogwarts. The house elves had cleaned the space thoroughly, filling the air with a pleasant musk, free of any musty odors. The room's furnishings were simple, with most of the space left empty. Near the back, a bed, desk, bookshelf, and wardrobe were prepared. Considering the severe cold weather that would last for 2 or 3 months, the elves had thoughtfully installed a fireplace. Atticus casually closed the door and walked into the warm room. The carved windows offered a view of Hagrid's hut and the Forbidden Forest, with a glimpse of the Quidditch pitch in the distance. A candlestick on the desk emitted a steady glow. Atticus stepped forward, arranging quills, ink, and other writing utensils neatly. He placed a photo of himself and Grandma Farina on the right side of the desk. In the photo, Atticus appeared much younger. The photograph captured a moment from the summer vacation between Atticus Blaine's 4th and 5th grade years. It was taken at the photo studio across from the orphanage, with Farina by his side. Little did anyone know that this would be their final picture together. End of this chapter. Chapter 26, Memory and Horcruxes. On a clear night, the sky was a tapestry of stars, each one gleaming like a bright silver bead set against the dark expanse. Yet, the moonlight, which should have been bright and clear, appeared strangely muted. A hazy mist enveloped it, casting an eerie red hue, as if a blood-stained hand had gently brushed across its surface. A brisk wind swept from the vast, mysterious, forbidden forest towards the castle, nudging open the window of Atticus Blaine's dormitory. The red moonlight seized the opportunity to slip inside, casting a vivid crimson halo on the dark brown floor. On the desk, a stone box lay partially open. It seemed to possess a peculiar magic, swallowing any light that dared to enter. The candlestick's glow was absorbed, leaving the other half of the box shrouded in darkness, its contents obscured from view. Atticus leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on a thumb-sized glass bottle he held delicately between his fingers. Inside, a silver mist swirled slowly, resembling a miniature galaxy in motion. This was a bottle of extracted memory, and though Atticus was its owner, he couldn't recall when he had left it behind. That morning, upon encountering Professor McGonagall and Harry Potter, a message had inexplicably surfaced in his mind. It instructed him to retrieve something crucial hidden beneath the dormitory floor once his memory returned. The condition to trigger this message was seeing Harry Potter in person. Why did I set such a condition back then? Atticus pondered, his heart quickening as a possibility dawned on him. Could this memory be linked to the plot of Harry Potter? Have I been unable to recall the story from my previous life because I deliberately removed this memory? He murmured to himself, but quickly dismissed the notion. The greatest advantage of being a traveler between worlds was foreknowledge of the plot. Knowing the story meant avoiding dangers and reaping benefits. Atticus was certain he wouldn't willingly forfeit such an advantage. In truth, Atticus could easily reintegrate the memory to resolve his doubts, but he was cautious. Memories represent a person's past and experiences, and they can even alter one's personality. He wasn't sure if the message in his mind was genuinely left by him, or if it had been implanted by someone else using memory magic. If it were the latter, the caster might have anticipated that he would retrieve and integrate it, potentially embedding false information to mislead him. Of course, anyone capable of forcibly extracting and altering his memory wouldn't need to resort to such elaborate measures. They could simply control his actions with magic. Despite this, Atticus couldn't dismiss the possibility. During his school years, he wasn't as strong as he was now, and it wasn't inconceivable that someone might have taken advantage of him. After much deliberation, Atticus decided to temporarily forgo reintegrating the memory. His skills in memory magic were not exceptional, and if the memory had been tampered with by a master, he might not detect it. The prudent course of action was to seek the expertise of a memory master for an appraisal. Is there a master of memory magic at Hogwarts? Atticus wondered. Atticus Blaine must be one of the few who could rival Dumbledore, but unless he had consumed 2 bowls of Felix Felicis in succession, he would never make such a foolish choice. After securing the memory vial close to his body, Atticus stood up and removed the partially covered stone lid. He quietly gazed at the contents of the box. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on his face, making his expression appear enigmatic. Inside the box lay a relic from one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, Rowena Ravenclaw, the esteemed founder of Ravenclaw House. This treasure, once a symbol of calmness and wisdom, now lay in ruins, split in half with blackened, dry scabs marring its surface. Ravenclaw's diadem had been lost for centuries. Atticus could only imagine the lengths Voldemort went to in order to find it, and he felt a deep indignation at Voldemort's desecration of such a treasure by turning it into a Horcrux. Atticus could envision the chaos its appearance in the underground world would cause. Wizards from ancient lineages, sharing the same magical heritage as the Hogwarts founders, would likely offer all their wealth for it, even if it meant a bloody conflict with the Malfoy family, the wealthiest in the wizarding world. The prospect of achieving financial freedom was tantalizingly close, yet Atticus knew he had to destroy this opportunity himself. Reflecting on it now, he felt a heavy weight in his heart. The act of destroying the diadem was another matter worth contemplating. Atticus vividly remembered discovering the diadem and could still sense the remnants of fiendfire that had permeated his magic. However, the memory of its destruction was hazy. The reason for this phenomenon likely lay in the small memory vial he had just examined. "Revert to normal," Atticus commanded, pointing his wand at the diadem. The two old, faded halves trembled in his palm before settling into stillness. This was not unexpected. Although the powerful dark magic of the Horcrux had been eradicated by Atticus's fierce fire, the diadem itself still held a peculiar magic. Restoring such a legendary magical item was no simple task. Does the diadem truly grant the bearer unimaginable wisdom, as the rumors suggest? Atticus mused. At the very least, Voldemort had not discovered the diadem's inherent power. Otherwise, he would not have acted so recklessly. "I'll set it aside for now," Atticus decided. "Perhaps I'll try using adhesive to piece it together another day. Maybe those secretive witches with peculiar minds won't notice the difference." The cold air outside clashed with the warmth inside, creating a draft that slammed the open window shut. Atticus walked over to close it, and, with his keen eyesight, noticed an oil lamp bobbing its way out of the forbidden forest, heading towards Hagrid's cabin. It must be Hermione Granger informing Hagrid of my return to Hogwarts as an Inquisitor, Atticus thought, but he might have misunderstood it as a directive from the Ministry of Magic. He frowned, recalling their morning encounter. Hagrid seemed anxious about the news, but why? Did he suspect the Ministry had sent Atticus to trouble Dumbledore, or did he know something about the Chamber of Secrets, perhaps even having a direct connection? Atticus pursed his lips, his gaze fixed intently on Hagrid's cabin. After a moment of contemplation, he turned his attention to the room nearby. Atticus Blaine glanced away from the tower, its windows still aglow with the flicker of candlelight, and shook his head. As Professor Snape had mentioned, Dumbledore might not be as noble as everyone believes, yet he is certainly not malevolent. His unwavering trust in Hagrid was proof enough that Hagrid was beyond suspicion. "The headmaster is likely gathering the Dark Lord's Horcruxes by now," Atticus murmured to himself as he drew the curtains and turned back into the room. "If he's willing to retrieve the shattered Horcrux, I would be prepared to offer a fair price for Professor Snape's sake." End of this chapter. Chapter 27, Skynet. Time at school always feels comfortable and serene, unlike the relentless hustle of working life, where one often feels like a clockwork puppet constantly on the move to make a living. Atticus Blaine hadn't noticed how quickly 2 weeks had passed. Tomorrow marked the first day of the second half of the semester. Typically, Hogwarts only hosts a grand opening feast at the start of each school year to welcome new students and celebrate the beginning of a new term. However, this year was different. Due to the terror attacks that had caused widespread panic last semester, Dumbledore decided to hold an unconventional banquet in the Great Hall to lift everyone's spirits. Snape was striding down the third-floor corridor, his presence causing nearby students to quickly step aside, wary of the stern and intimidating potions master. Snape was accustomed to such reactions and paid no attention to the students as he swiftly navigated a few corners, stopping in front of a classroom that remained unused throughout the year. "Come in, Professor Snape," a voice from within the classroom called out, halting Snape's hand mid-knock. He pushed the door open and found Atticus Blaine standing in the center of the room, arms crossed, gazing at a wall with a satisfied smile. "Principal Dumbledore, would you like to invite me to dinner?" Snape entered the room, closing the door behind him with a sneer. "It seems you, like our esteemed headmaster, are nearly omniscient, Atticus." "I saw you leaving Dumbledore's office and coming straight here. It wasn't hard to guess," Atticus replied, raising an eyebrow. He gestured towards the wall with a smug expression. "Take a look, Professor Snape. I've spent several nights under the disillusionment charm, running around the castle. I finally finished debugging all the screens just before the start of school. If I were to rate it, I'd say the effect is quite impressive. Snape ignored Atticus's self-congratulation and turned his attention to the wall, which was divided into hundreds of small squares, each displaying a different scene. His expression shifted slightly as he observed the images. In one, Harry and Ron were leaving the school hospital, planning to inform Hermione about the evening's banquet and see if she wanted to join. In another, Crabbe and Goyle were waiting in the owlery for Draco Malfoy, who emerged moments later, cursing with owl feathers stuck to his head. He tossed an owl onto the rafters, prompting laughter from Crabbe and Goyle and a smug grin from Malfoy. Elsewhere, at the statue of the humpbacked witch on the fourth-floor corridor, a thin, curly-haired boy whispered something to the statue. The witch's humpback opened, and two identical red-haired boys climbed out, high-fiving their friend and showing off the butterbeer they had bought from the three broomsticks. Filch had just caught two first-year students attempting to throw dung bombs into a bathroom. He dragged them by their collars towards his office, encountering Percy along the way, who was reprimanding Sally Ann Perks for using the leg locker curse on Padma Patil, causing her to fall into a puddle outside the second-floor bathroom. Filch promptly added her to his group of detainees. Meanwhile, Neville entered Professor Sprout's office, proudly holding a bubble branch gifted by his Uncle Algy. Professor McGonagall stood at the door of her office, her expression stern as she watched a blond man in a turquoise robe, a wizard with a flowing, bright demeanor. A series of flashing images vividly displayed the happenings at Hogwarts before Snape's eyes. He scrutinized the people in those pictures, observing them as they moved about or engaged in lively conversations, and finally, he focused on their smiling faces. When Atticus Blaine's image appeared, Snape's expression shifted. Indeed, on the night Atticus returned to school, he had confided in Snape about his plans. However, Snape had initially dismissed the whimsical idea his favorite student had concocted. It wasn't until Hogwarts was laid out so clearly before him that Snape realized the true power of Atticus's creation. "How did you do that?" Snape asked, his voice dropping to a whisper, his eyes betraying a hint of fear. "I know you've set up numerous gadgets around the castle, but how did you manage to keep them hidden?" "It's quite simple," Atticus replied with a relaxed demeanor. "I used the disillusionment charm along with some potent spells to protect all the panoramic telescopes. This way, the young wizards won't be able to find them, and even the professors won't notice unless they search deliberately." Snape had to admit that he hadn't detected anything unusual. This device was unlike a wizard's typical surveillance. It didn't evoke any sense of being watched. Despite his vigilance, Snape hadn't felt observed at all. "The principle behind it is straightforward," Atticus continued, as if explaining a basic potion to a first-year student. "Like the Wizard Wireless Network, WWN, it transmits signals through the magical magnetic field. However, my setup transmits images while the radio transmits sound." Atticus shrugged, as if he had just brewed a simple potion. The biggest challenge was the chaotic and strong magical magnetic field at Hogwarts, which interfered with signal stability. "I spent an entire afternoon researching interference spells, made some adjustments, and calibrated the telescopes according to the varying strength of the magical field throughout the castle. It was exhausting. Honestly, next time I see Dumbledore, could you ask him to give me some overtime pay?" Speaking of Dumbledore, Snape's face was pale, his expression clouded with concern. "Does he know what you're doing, Atticus?" Atticus didn't immediately respond, as he noticed Percy Weasley, the red-haired emblem of the Weasley family, sneaking into the basement of Ravenclaw Tower. Percy's actions were suspicious. Atticus quickly located the corresponding image on the wall near the window. In the picture, Percy was passionately kissing a beautiful girl with long brown curly hair. "Well, well," Atticus remarked with a hint of admiration. "Being a prefect certainly has its perks. If I had been a prefect back then, I wouldn't have— Oh, right, I forgot I don't have a girlfriend." With a chuckle, Atticus finally addressed Snape's question. "Maybe Dumbledore knows. Maybe he doesn't. I'm not entirely sure, Professor Snape. When I returned from my trip, the headmaster's reaction wasn't what I expected. I thought he would keep a close eye on me, but instead, he seemed to pay me no mind at all. Do you know why?" End of this chapter. Chapter 28. the school opening dinner. As night descended, young wizards and professors gradually gathered in the grand auditorium from all directions. The ceiling of the hall mirrored the brilliant starry sky outside, casting a magical glow over the scene. Beneath this celestial canopy, 4 long tables buzzed with the chatter of students eagerly sharing tales of their Christmas holidays. The festive atmosphere helped ease the tension, allowing Harry to breathe a sigh of relief. The last thing he wanted was to be the center of attention, scrutinized by all. Most of the professors had already taken their places at the head table, with Dumbledore seated in his customary spot. Professor Lockhart was animatedly recounting to Professor McGonagall the numerous fan letters he had received over the holidays. Professor McGonagall shot a disapproving glance at Dumbledore, who feigned ignorance of the exchange. This amusing interaction brought a smile to Harry's face, but his mood shifted when he noticed the empty seat next to Professor Snape. A troubling thought crossed his mind, one he hoped wasn't true. Meanwhile, Ron was engaged in conversation with his twin brothers. "You two came back early this morning. Why haven't I seen you all day?" he inquired. "Oh, our dear little Ronnie has learned to ask questions?" Fred teased, raising an eyebrow at Ron. "By the way, why isn't Miss Know-It-All at the dinner?" Harry quickly nudged Ron under the table, hoping to prevent any slip-ups. "It's none of your business, Fred," Ron retorted, clearly annoyed. "Besides, little Ronnie has learned to keep a secret," George chimed in, echoing his brother's playful tone. With that, the twins turned their attention elsewhere. At that moment, Harry noticed Neville's uneasy gaze fixed on him. Sensing Neville's unspoken concern, Harry knew he couldn't reveal that Hermione was still in the hospital wing, recovering from an unfortunate incident involving her hair. To avoid further questions, he focused intently on the silver spoon on his plate. Across the room at the Slytherin table, Malfoy was questioning Marcus Flint, who bore a striking resemblance to a troll. "I wasn't at school then, Draco," Flint replied impatiently. "I heard about the incident later. It's said to be connected to him, but Dumbledore kept the details under wraps, and the Gryffindor team hasn't uttered a word. In my opinion, they don't know much either, as they were carried back by the professors that night." During the Christmas break, Flint had tried out for the Luxembourg Quidditch team, but his performance was disappointing. Academically, this meant he would have to accept a mundane job in an obscure department after graduation, as per his family's wishes. The young wizards continued to fill the auditorium, merging into the 4 long tables. The room was as lively as if hundreds of Cornish elves had been let loose. Many students craned their necks toward the professor's table, eager for the meal to begin. "Ah, here we come," Snape heard Dumbledore murmur softly. Looking up, he saw Atticus Blaine striding in from the foyer, making his way swiftly to the staff table. "Sorry, everyone. I was so busy that I forgot the dinner." Atticus apologized quietly. The professors greeted him with warm smiles. Earlier, Professor McGonagall had informed the faculty that an additional security guard would be present in the castle for the second half of the semester. Atticus had also taken the time to visit each of them individually, ensuring a smooth transition into his new role. Over the table from him, asked with a curious tilt of her head, "You seem unusually quiet." Draco Malfoy forced a smile, trying to mask his unease. "Just tired, Pansy," he replied, pushing the lamb chops around his plate without much interest. He couldn't shake the image of that gruesome scene from his mind, nor the stern warning from his father. Atticus Blaine was not someone to be trifled with, and Draco had no intention of crossing him. Meanwhile, at the staff table, Atticus Blaine was engaged in a tie-in with Dumbledore. The headmaster's eyes twinkled with curiosity and wisdom as he spoke. "Atticus, your presence here has certainly stirred quite the interest among the students," Dumbledore remarked, his voice warm and inviting. Atticus nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips. "I expected as much, Headmaster. It's not every day a new face appears at Hogwarts, especially one with a past as colorful as mine." Dumbledore chuckled softly, his gaze thoughtful. "Indeed, but I trust you'll find your place here. Hogwarts has a way of embracing those who seek knowledge and growth." As the feast continued, the great hall buzzed with chatter and laughter. The clinking of cutlery and the aroma of delicious food filled the air, creating a lively and welcoming atmosphere. Yet beneath the surface, whispers and speculations about Atticus's true purpose at Hogwarts persisted. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances, their earlier pact weighing heavily on their minds. They knew the importance of keeping Atticus's past a secret, but the curiosity among their peers was palpable. "Do you think he'll really find the heir of Slytherin?" Hermione whispered, her brow furrowed with concern. Ron shrugged, glancing around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "I hope so. The sooner this whole mess is sorted, the better." Harry nodded in agreement, his thoughts drifting to the mysterious events that had plagued the school. "Let's just hope he knows what he's doing." As the evening wore on, the focus of the students' discussions shifted once more. Theories about Atticus's role at Hogwarts ranged from the plausible to the absurd, each more imaginative than the last. Yet, amidst the speculation, one thing was clear. Atticus Blaine was a figure of intrigue, and his presence at Hogwarts promised to bring about change, for better or worse. On the other side of Atticus Blaine, he turned his head to watch Malfoy, who was unusually quiet, and asked with concern, "Is everything all right, Malfoy?" "Shut up, Pansy," Malfoy snapped urgently, not even glancing at her, "unless you want to be neatly sliced in half by someone." Dumbledore, shaking his silver beard that was stained with thick mushroom soup, turned to Atticus Blaine, who was busy with a grilled sausage, and smiled warmly. "It seems you're quite popular with the students, Atticus." "They're simply curious about a stranger who suddenly appeared, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus replied politely, nodding in acknowledgement. In front of Dumbledore, he was careful not to say too much, and his caution was not without reason. Dumbledore, unfazed by Atticus's deliberate restraint, continued to engage him cordially. "Severus mentioned that you haven't rested for several nights. I want to thank you, Atticus, for your efforts in keeping the children safe." Atticus smiled modestly, but Dumbledore was not finished. "Though I am quite old, Atticus, fortunately, I am not a pedantic old man. You are right. Ensuring the children's safety is paramount." Professor McGonagall, seated to Dumbledore's left with her ears keenly tuned to the conversation, pursed her lips, looking displeased. "I think it's a brilliant idea, Atticus," Dumbledore continued, referring to the alchemy set Atticus had installed in his office. "Although some voices claim it invades the privacy of young wizards," he added tactfully, expressing his stance on Atticus's monitoring of the students. "Thank you for your understanding, Headmaster Dumbledore. If you wish, once the Chamber of Secrets incident is resolved, I can relocate the surveillance system to your office." Atticus nodded gratefully. "It would certainly be more effective than using portraits to monitor the school, though this was left unsaid." They exchanged a few more pleasantries, and Dumbledore expressed his hope that Atticus would spend more time with the students. "The children would love to get to know you, Atticus," Dumbledore concluded with a simple request. "Traitor," Atticus muttered under his breath as he withdrew his gaze. Snape, seated between Atticus and Dumbledore, remained expressionless, though his face darkened, clearly aware of whom Atticus was referring to. Across the staff dining table, Lockhart, who had been unable to hear the conversation clearly but was eager to join in, glanced surreptitiously at Atticus, who had picked up his silver fork again. For some inexplicable reason, Lockhart felt a strange sense of unease. End of this chapter. Chapter 29. Unexplainable. The school opening dinner concluded with an awkwardly cold joke from Dumbledore, prompting the young wizards to disperse in small groups. Despite the evening's events, they remained puzzled about the purpose of Atticus Blaine's return to Hogwarts. The first week promised a grand detective campaign within the school, and Atticus had already departed before the students. He was acutely aware that his return to Hogwarts was not a vacation. As the students gathered in the auditorium, his mission officially commenced. Until he discovered the Chamber of Secrets, Atticus anticipated a grueling schedule, working through the night and resting during the day. In the monitoring room, Atticus sat in a chair, his eyes fixed on the scene gradually filling with students. He paid particular attention to those young wizards who seemed isolated, scrutinizing their behavior for anything unusual. Naturally, Professor Lockhart was also under his watchful eye. The timing of the Chamber of Secrets opening, coinciding with Lockhart's tenure as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, aroused his suspicion. After dinner, Under the prefect's guidance, most students returned to their respective common rooms. However, about a dozen young wizards managed to slip away unnoticed. More than half of them were Gryffindors. Harry and Ron headed to the school hospital, while the Weasley twins took advantage of Filch's distraction to dash into the passage leading to the Hufflepuff common room underground. They manipulated the fruit oil painting on the wall before jumping in. Atticus also noticed Penelope Clearwater entering the Ravenclaw lounge, only to return shortly after, and Percy Weasley leaving the Gryffindor common room around the same time. It was likely that another clandestine meeting was taking place somewhere in the castle. Apart from Professor McGonagall and Professor Lockhart, who returned to their offices to work late, the other professors retired to the staff dormitory. Before entering his office, Headmaster Dumbledore turned and playfully blinked his blue eyes down the corridor, as if to greet someone. Atticus smirked and looked away from the screen. Everything seemed normal, as he had expected. Without a stroke of luck, it was unlikely to uncover anything significant in just a few days. The fireplace, adorned with intricate carvings, crackled with flames as Atticus leaned back in his chair, sipping a cup of bitter hot tea. His gaze occasionally swept across the entire wall, maintaining a calm demeanor. About half an hour later, the figures on the monitoring screen had dwindled to ghosts. Atticus noticed Peeves, wearing a comical round hat, gleefully rushing into a long-abandoned bathroom on the second floor. Soon, water began seeping from the bathroom door into the corridor outside. The long night had just begun, and Atticus was already feeling restless. He retrieved a copy of Basic Model of Spells and Structural Optimization from his desk, flipping through it casually in search of inspiration. Suddenly, movement caught his eye on the lower right corner of the monitoring screen. Professor Lockhart, now clad in a purple robe and carrying a few books, emerged with a charming smile. Judging by his direction, he seemed to be heading towards Atticus's monitoring room. Both of their offices were on the first floor, and within 2 minutes, Professor Lockhart appeared outside. As soon as the knock echoed through the office, Atticus Blaine swiftly waved his magic wand. A massive black curtain unfurled across the wall, and the stool beneath him danced back to the desk, straightening itself before settling into its usual position. "Professor Lockhart?" Atticus exclaimed with feigned surprise as he opened the door. "What brings you here?" He ushered the enigmatic Lockhart into the office and offered him a cup of tea, though Lockhart seemed uninterested in drinking it. "Well, it's like this," Lockhart began, intending to explain his visit. However, his eyes caught sight of Wandering with Werewolves on Atticus's bookshelf, and his smile grew impossibly wide. "It was my mistake, Atticus. I should have realized it sooner," he said, winking at a bewildered Atticus. "A cunning and crazy admirer, aren't you? It's truly a delightful surprise." "Sorry, Professor Lockhart. Perhaps I'm a bit slow to grasp what you're implying," Atticus replied. "No need to hide it any longer, Atticus. You came to Hogwarts just to be near me, didn't you?" Lockhart beamed. "Professor McGonagall mentioned that the school board sent an investigator to look into the Chamber of Secrets. I imagine you went to great lengths to make that happen." Atticus glanced at the bookshelf, where Lockhart's gaze lingered and blinked. "If you're referring to Wandering with Werewolves, yes, I did have some trouble with a pack of werewolves. To better understand them, I sought out some of the most renowned books on the subject." "Aha! Finally revealed, isn't it?" Lockhart exclaimed, as if he had uncovered a great secret. "Just like Miss Granger in her second year, who knows me so well. Yes, many are impressed by the calm and courage I displayed when trapped in a phone booth by werewolves. But you're different, Atticus. You want to learn how I managed to handle the werewolves, don't you?" An hour later, Lockhart left Atticus's office, clearly satisfied. Standing at the door, he lowered his voice and said, "Don't worry about explaining to the board, Atticus. The Chamber of Secrets attacks won't happen again. You know why, don't you?" He winked at Atticus once more. "Because I'm here." Atticus watched as Professor Lockhart departed. He closed the door and stood before his desk, eyeing the gift Lockhart had left, a set of signed hardcover books. "What an interesting fellow," Atticus chuckled to himself. Later that evening at Hogwarts, Atticus discussed the suspicious individuals at the school with Professor Snape. When Gilderoy Lockhart's name came up, Snape's disdain and sarcasm were palpable. Yet, Atticus found himself puzzled, unable to see any real issue with Lockhart. However, as a renowned celebrity writer in the magical world, he is at least a friendly wizard, Atticus mused. Writing about someone as uniquely eccentric as Lockhart is no easy task. End of this chapter. Chapter 30, Chain Reaction. The first week of school flew by in a whirlwind of rumors. Harry found himself in a familiar situation, reminiscent of the time he accidentally revealed his ability to speak Parseltongue in Professor Lockhart's dueling class the previous year. He could sense the furtive glances and hear the ominous whispers surrounding him. Among those observing him, there was a mix of sympathy and schadenfreude, even within Gryffindor House. Harry wasn't particularly surprised by this reaction. On Monday night, Seamus had informed him that Hufflepuff's Ernie Macmillan had finally learned from Professor Sprout about the mysterious figure they encountered on the night of the orientation dinner. Harry had already anticipated the reason for Atticus Blaine's presence. The garlic, exorcisms, and amulets that had been popular last semester were once again in vogue on campus. Fortunately, Neville had refrained from wearing his amethyst necklace this time. The person Harry despised most was Draco Malfoy. After potions class on Wednesday afternoon, Harry was about to leave the classroom, frustrated with his D-grade homework, when Goyle and Crabbe blocked the doorway. Given their size, it was nearly impossible for anyone to push past them. Harry turned and glared coldly at Draco, who sat on his desk with a smug grin. "Move your two dim-witted followers out of the way, Malfoy, unless you want to see them chopped into pieces and stuffed into jars," Harry snapped. Malfoy's smirk widened, and the inexplicable pity in his eyes only fueled Harry's anger. "Speaking of being chopped into pieces, Potter," Malfoy drawled, raising his pointed chin, "I almost feel sorry for you. I thought the worst that could happen was you ending up in Azkaban, living next to the Dementors for the rest of your life. But now, who knows? Maybe you'll be cut into pieces and used as fertilizer for Professor Sprout's mandrakes." "He's been making threats like that lately, Harry," Neville, standing beside Harry, whispered, his face flushed. "He said the same thing to me in the Great Hall at lunch." "And you let Malfoy walk out of the Great Hall alive, Neville? That's unbelievable," Ron fumed, pulling out his taped wand and pointing it at Malfoy. "Want to see who becomes flower fertilizer first, Malfoy?" 20 points from Gryffindor, plus 2 days detention, Weasley, Snape interjected, having been packing up at the podium and ignoring the conflict until now. He approached lazily, fixing Ron with a stern gaze. "I hope this teaches you a lesson, Weasley. In my classroom, wands are not to be used against fellow students." The aftermath of this confrontation left Harry in a foul mood for several days, affecting his performance during Quidditch practice. Wood was particularly concerned, given Harry's previous mishap in last year's final. "If you want to catch the murderer and prove your innocence, Harry, could you please wait until after the final to start your plan?" Wood pleaded. "Wood shouldn't have said that to you, Harry. It's not your fault," Hermione exclaimed angrily on Sunday night in the hospital wing, after Harry, feeling downcast, recounted Wood's words to her. "You can't blame him too much, Hermione," Ron interjected. "Fred and George told me that Wood wants to join Puddlemere United as a professional Quidditch player after graduation. Winning the championship with Gryffindor means a lot to him. Unfortunately, Wood is already in his 6th year, and this year or next is his last chance." Ron's words in defense of Wood only deepened Harry's guilt. "But he can't blame Harry for not winning the match, Ron. Why can't he find it in himself?" Hermione retorted, crossing her arms in frustration. Ron shrugged and sensibly closed his mouth. The three of them understood that until the heir of Slytherin was discovered, Harry's situation was unlikely to improve. This was the most challenging part. Otherwise, the school board wouldn't have hired someone specifically to handle it. Most of the cat-like features on Hermione's face and body faded, making her less self-conscious about her appearance. She threw off the quilt, got out of bed, and paced the room with furrowed brows, contemplating ways to help Harry clear up the misunderstandings surrounding him. Outside the door, the voices of several young Gryffindor students could be heard. They were familiar voices: Neville, Ginny, Petter, and Lavender, pleading with Madame Pomfrey to let them visit Hermione. Rumors that Hermione had also been attacked and petrified had not yet been dispelled, but Madame Pomfrey firmly denied their request. Hermione glanced at the door, her expression softening. She was touched by her friend's concern. "Maybe we can seek help from Mr. Blaine," Hermione suggested, staring at the doorknob. For some reason, Atticus Blaine, whom she had only met once, came to mind. He seemed like a polite and understanding person. "Are you crazy, Hermione?" Ron exclaimed, his cheeks puffing up in surprise. "Did you forget that Harry's current situation was caused by this investigator?" "That's not his fault, Ron," Hermione replied assertively. "Mr. Blaine was just following the school board's orders to investigate the Chamber of Secrets. That's his duty, but it doesn't mean he's against Harry, does it?" Hermione was pleased to see her words had made them think deeply. She turned to Harry, who was frowning, and asked, "So Harry, as far as you know, has Mr. Blaine made any real moves?" "That's the problem, Hermione," Ron interjected before Harry could respond. "Many people thought our investigator would launch some grand operation, like organizing a castle-wide search or interrogating Slytherin students one by one. But so far, he hasn't done anything. He just stays in his office, as if he's on vacation at Hogwarts. I think Hagrid must have been mistaken. Maybe someone else beat Bill and Charlie." Harry added with a somber expression, "Fred and George told us that Mr. Blaine never goes out at night. During the day, he occasionally visits the kitchen to grab something to eat and take care of hygiene." This revelation surprised Hermione. She stood at the foot of the bed, frowning, her lips pursed as if she were Professor McGonagall discovering Gryffindor students caught sneaking out at night. "Fred and George are monitoring Mr. Blaine? How do they know his whereabouts so precisely?" Hermione asked. "I asked, but they wouldn't say anything," Ron replied angrily. "Fran told me it's the secret to their success." "Humph. I don't see any success other than avoiding Filch." Ron's assessment wasn't very flattering, though Harry felt Fred and George did a good job of keeping spirits high, especially with their popular joke products. The discussion about how Fred and George spied on Mr. Blaine had veered off topic and was unlikely to yield answers. At 8 o'clock, Madame Pomfrey ushered them out. On the way back to the Gryffindor common room, Ron continued to grumble about Hermione's reluctance to share her thoughts. Potions homework was a familiar challenge for Lee. Typically, Hermione insisted that they complete their assignments independently before allowing anyone to copy even a single word. "If you can prove your innocence to Atticus Blaine, Harry, he might be able to help you explain the situation to everyone. As an investigator, his word could be more convincing than even Headmaster Dumbledore's," Hermione had advised. Standing in front of the portrait of the fat lady, Harry pondered Hermione's recent warning. He hesitated, considering the weight of her words. Note: this is the end of the chapter. Thank you for your support, and please consider investing and voting. Chapter 31. The Announcement. The first morning of the second week of school began with a chorus of yawns. Professor Snape's potions homework had clearly troubled more than just a few students. The Gryffindor common room had been bustling all night with second-year students frantically trying to complete their assignments. No one wanted to face detention with Snape so early in the term. Before Harry and Ron finally retired to their dormitory, they noticed Neville sitting by the fireplace, struggling with his 5-foot-long essay. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't realize his robe had caught fire. Fortunately, his toad, Life, bit him on the ear, jolting him back to reality and saving him from a fiery fate. Neville likely got little sleep that night, and it took Seamus and Dean a good 10 minutes to rouse him from bed the next morning. As they descended the spiral staircase, Neville tumbled straight into the common room. "I'll speak with Professor Snape, Mr. Longbottom, and see if he can be more lenient," Professor McGonagall said, her stern demeanor softening at the sight of Neville's scorched robe, dark circles under his eyes, and the bite marks on his ear. Neville's mishap momentarily distracted everyone from the fact that there was an inquisitor at the school, but such distractions were fleeting. Oliver Wood, determined not to let the cold weather and rain deter his path to the championship, had scheduled an intense training regimen. From the first week of the term, practices were held 4 times a week, maintaining a grueling pace until the finals. "You all know Slytherin will be strong this year," Wood shouted to his team, who were braving the wind on their brooms. "We face a tough battle in the finals. Of course, if we're knocked out by Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw, just forget I said anything. Can someone please calm Oliver down?" Katie Bell, dodging a bludger sent her way by George, nearly slipped off her broom. "I'm soaked, and I haven't felt comfortable in days," she exclaimed in frustration. "Maybe Harry can help, Katie," George suggested with a grin, swooping past her. "He could unleash his Chamber of Secrets monster on Flint and Malfoy. That might cheer Wood up." George's comment drew laughter from the team, and even Harry couldn't help but chuckle. "Harry, Harry!" Ron called, sprinting from the castle to the pitch. He had been playing wizard chess with Siamis in the common room, but news from Neville had interrupted their game. "What's going on, Ron?" Harry asked, guiding his Nimbus 2000 to the edge of the field. Seeing Ron's pale face, he sensed trouble. "Come to the hall, Harry, right now!" Ron urged, pulling Harry along without giving him a chance to inform Wood. The rest of the team, fearing another attack, followed them to the castle, leaving Wood alone in the sky. By the time they reached the foyer, a crowd had gathered around a newly posted announcement on the bulletin board. As Harry approached, the crowd parted, revealing Hufflepuff's Ernie and Susan Bones, who eyed him with curiosity. Percy stood with a serious expression, while Ginny, behind him, clutched her chest, looking pale. "For you, Weasley, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," someone murmured, but the rest of the announcement was lost in the buzz of the crowd. "Opportunity, isn't it?" Draco Malfoy stood at the front, flanked by his two loyal followers who had secured the best spot for him. As he noticed Harry and Ron approaching, drenched and shivering, a malicious grin spread across his face. "This might be your only chance in life to afford a magic wand. Are you really going to pass it up?" "Go away, Malfoy. I don't need you worrying about me," Ron retorted bluntly. Perhaps realizing that the Gryffindor players were all present, Malfoy signaled Crabbe and Goyle to step aside, casting a spiteful glance at Harry. This allowed Harry to finally see the source of the commotion. Pinned to the bulletin board was a new announcement, large enough to overshadow all other notices about second-hand spellbook octa, ons, Filch's frequent reminders of school rules, chocolate frog card exchanges, and lost and found items. Written in bold red ink, it read, "To all Hogwarts students and teachers. In light of the ongoing attacks and the inability to ensure the safety of all staff and students, Principal Albus Dumbledore and Vice Principal Minerva McGonagall have approved a reward. Any student who provides credible information about the attacks in the Chamber of Secrets will receive a cash reward of 100 galleons from the school board." Atticus Blaine Harry's face turned ashen, as if 1,000 Cornish pixies were shrieking in his ears. "Is this the method the school board's investigator is relying on?" Fred muttered angrily, his voice low. "Encouraging everyone to snitch on each other? It's outrageous!" Ginny looked on the verge of tears, and Neville's whispered warning made Harry's heart plummet. "Filch headed straight to the 3rd floor after seeing the announcement, Harry. You need to be careful." Harry didn't need to ask what Neville meant by being careful. He was almost certain of what Filch would report to the investigator. Mrs. Norris had been the first victim this school year, and unfortunately, Harry and his friends had been the first to arrive at the scene, leading Filch to believe they were responsible for his beloved pet's petrification. "Go talk to him, Harry," Ron urged, worry evident in his voice. Harry understood Ron's suggestion. He should speak to Mr. Blaine before the majority of the castle's students reported him. Hermione had suggested the same thing in the hospital wing the previous night, but Harry had refused for several reasons. He feared that if he admitted to hearing a strange, murderous voice before each attack, people would think he was insane. He also didn't want the house elf Dobby to be punished for confessing. But beyond these concerns, what could he possibly say to justify himself? Moreover, confiding in an investigator who knew little about the situation rather than Principal Dumbledore felt inherently wrong to Harry. Harry stumbled out of the hall, heading towards the dormitory, ignoring Malfoy's laughter and neglecting to inform Professor Sprout that she would soon receive fresh flower fertilizers. Behind him, Fred and George exchanged a knowing glance, each seeing their own thoughts mirrored in the other's eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 32. The Story of Failure. In any case, Harry finally decided to follow Hermione's advice and talk to Atticus Blaine. Otherwise, he feared he would be driven mad by the strange glances and terrible gossip before the monster in the Chamber of Secrets turned someone else into a stone statue. Returning to the dormitory, he changed into clean clothes and smoothed his hair in front of the mirror, hoping to appear less rebellious. "You're wasting your time, my dear." The mirror, adorned with gold patterns, wheezed. "Thank you for the reminder," Harry replied, his expression annoyed. Harry chose to visit Mr. Blaine's office during dinner time, hoping to avoid the schadenfreude looks from others. However, as he descended to the third floor, he encountered the castle's caretaker, Argus Filch. Filch appeared to have been crying. His bulging eyes were red, and snot hung from his nose, trailing to his double chin. Upon seeing Harry, Filch restrained himself, glaring fiercely like a wounded hyena. "Someone will get what they deserve, Potter, and it won't be long." "What do you mean, Mr. Filch?" Harry's voice was weak, as if someone were strangling him. He was desperate to understand Filch's words, but Filch merely sneered and walked away. Harry was certain Filch had reported him. His heart pounded with fear, and he considered fleeing, worried that Mr. Blaine had accepted Filch's accusations. Yet, he knocked on Blaine's office door, knowing that if Blaine, a formidable figure who had once challenged Dumbledore in his 5th year, decided to send him to prison, only Headmaster Dumbledore could save him. After receiving permission to enter, the office door opened on its own. Harry stood at the threshold, scanning the room nervously, half expecting a rope to fly out and bind him. Aside from Dumbledore's unique circular office, Mr. Blaine's was the largest Harry had seen, unsurprising since it had been converted from a classroom. A fireplace by the window warmed the room, and at the far end were desks, bookshelves, and a simple bed. A peculiar smell lingered in the air, suggesting Mr. Blaine might be brewing potions. The most intriguing feature was the wall to the right of the door, entirely covered by a massive black curtain, behind which faint shimmering lights could be seen. For some reason, it reminded Harry of the Muggle world. Although the Dursleys never took him to the movies, he had seen them on TV a few times. "So, are you going to stand there and talk to me, Mr. Potter?" Atticus Blaine smiled gently from behind his desk. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Blaine." Harry quickly closed the door and approached. As he walked to the desk, he hesitated. "I'm just a little curious about that wall." "Understandable," Atticus replied with a smile, gesturing for Harry to sit. He moved to the fireplace to prepare tea. "I don't have any fine drinks to offer, but if you don't mind, let's have some tea, Mr. Potter." As Atticus returned with the tea, Harry's attention was drawn to a framed photograph on Blaine's desk. It depicted a very old man alongside Mr. Blaine, likely an elder close to him. To Harry's surprise, the image seemed to hold a story of its own. Surprised, Atticus Blaine, who appeared to be around Percy's age in the photograph, seemed a bit off. "Thank you," Harry said nervously as he accepted the hot tea. He quickly glanced at Mr. Blaine's slightly haggard face and realized what felt amiss. In the photo, Mr. Blaine had brown eyes similar to Hermione's when he was a student, but the investigator standing before him had striking lavender eyes. Was it the effect of magic? Harry wondered, momentarily dazed, but he quickly reminded himself that now was not the time to ponder such things. "Wondering why my eye color isn't quite right?" Atticus asked, leaning back in his chair with a cup of tea in hand. The misty steam blurred his expression, but his tone was not one of offense or anger. "Yeah, no," Harry replied awkwardly. The uneasy young wizard sitting across from him made Atticus chuckle. Despite Harry Potter's fame and the bright future ahead of him, his current immaturity and innocence were still evident to Atticus, who saw him as just a second-year wizard. "You must have met Mr. Filch just now, right?" Atticus inquired gently, sipping the bitter tea. As Mr. Blaine spoke, Harry suddenly recalled the unexpected encounter he and Ron had with Hagrid near Professor McGonagall's office during the Christmas vacation. Ron had compared Mr. Blaine to Principal Dumbledore. At the time, Harry hadn't thought much of it, but now he found himself agreeing with Ron's assessment. Unlike Professor Snape or Professor McGonagall, who exuded a stern presence, Mr. Blaine's fearsome quality came from his tolerant and gentle demeanor, underpinned by a natural self-confidence. This created a high degree of authority that made resistance seem futile. "Yes, Mr. Blaine, I saw Filch. He looked like he'd been crying a lot." Harry nodded hesitantly. "What do you think it was for, Mr. Potter?" Atticus asked with interest, blowing away the floating leaves on his tea. Harry's eyes flicked to the collar of Atticus's worn wizard robes, but he remained silent, as the question seemed rhetorical. Sensing the atmosphere was improving, Atticus decided not to intimidate Harry further. He set down his teacup, ready to proceed with the conversation. However, he was taken aback when Harry, who had been quiet until now, suddenly mustered the courage to speak. With his bright emerald eyes fixed on Atticus, he asked, "Mr. Blaine, do you also think that I am the heir of Slytherin and that I opened the Chamber of Secrets? P.S. The result of the nucleic acid test is abnormal, and I have to do a single-tube test again, which is annoying." End of this chapter. Chapter 33. The Story of Failure, Failed Conversation. Harry sat nervously, his eyes fixed on the contemplative Atticus Blaine. His hands gripped his robe tightly, and the courage he had been mustering evaporated the moment he posed his question. What would Mr. Blaine say? Deep down, Harry believed that the unusual investigator wouldn't easily fall for the school rumors. Yet, if Mr. Blaine succumbed to the pressure from the school board and needed to present a culprit urgently, what then? "If you're asking for my personal opinion, Potter," Atticus began, and Harry's fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I personally don't believe you are the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets, Mr. Potter." Harry's eyes widened in surprise, and his heart soared with relief, akin to the exhilaration of flying through thin, cold clouds on a broomstick for the first time. Even the dim office seemed to brighten and expand. "But why, sir?" Harry pressed on instinctively. "My Parseltongue ability, people know that Slytherin himself was the most famous Parseltongue." Atticus chuckled, casting a quick glance at Harry's scar. His expression relaxed. "What does being a Parseltongue signify, Mr. Potter? In the 1,000 years since Salazar Slytherin's era, there have been at least dozens of Parseltongues recorded in the wizarding world. I can't take that to mean you have a direct connection to Slytherin." Seeing Harry's expression lighten, Atticus added with a playful tone, "There are many other facts I can't ignore. For instance, why would Salazar Slytherin choose an heir from Gryffindor if he wanted one? And consider this. The boy who lived, who defeated the darkest wizard in history at the age of 1, freeing the British magical world from despair, fear, and death, and who is regarded as a favorite student by the greatest wizard of our time, Albus Dumbledore. How could Harry Potter attack his classmates?" Harry grinned, realizing he was beginning to like Mr. Blaine. Since entering the wizarding world, many had made a spectacle of his defeat of Voldemort. Some admired him, others thought he was merely seeking attention. Some despised him, while others were indifferent. Regardless of their stance, Harry always felt burdened when the topic arose. Mr. Blaine, however, was different. His tone carried a light-hearted mockery devoid of malice, coupled with respect, as if discussing an amusing little jinx. Before meeting Mr. Blaine, Harry never imagined he could have such a pleasant conversation with a wizard from Slytherin House. "If you're worried about the announcement I posted, Mr. Potter, you needn't be," Atticus said, rising to refill his cup with strong tea at the fireplace. Noticing Harry's untouched cup, he refrained from further sentimentality. The sky outside had darkened, and across the forbidden forest, only the lights of Hagrid's cabin remained visible. "From the start, I never expected to gain any useful information from people's reports," Atticus continued, leaning against the fireplace. Harry turned to face him, and before he could inquire further, Mr. Blaine elaborated. "Honestly, I thought that once news spread of my investigation at Hogwarts, those acting in secret would react somehow. After all, if they dared to cause trouble under Dumbledore's watch, it's unlikely." "Do you understand what I mean, Mr. Potter?" Atticus Blaine asked, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Harry frowned, pondering the question before his expression softened, and he nodded in understanding. Blaine was likely suggesting that if the heir of Slytherin didn't react to the presence of an investigator, it would appear as though they were intimidated by the investigator's reputation, especially in front of Headmaster Dumbledore. It seemed improbable that someone who had already launched 2 attacks on young wizards would tolerate such an affront. Atticus blinked with satisfaction and continued, "I suspect the attacker is eager to strike again, and I'll be ready to catch him." Harry couldn't help but roll his eyes at the four. Atticus Blaine staying in his office all day without patrolling. How could he possibly catch anyone that way? The ideal scenario, Blaine mused, would be for the attacker to confront me directly, to prove his prowess. In that case, I could put an end to him and, resolve the situation. He showed a flicker of annoyance, but I didn't expect him to be more cautious than anticipated. I've been monitoring the castle for a week and found nothing amiss. This has made me anxious, so I had to take action to provoke the lurking threat. Harry realized that Blaine's announcement was merely a ploy, a provocation intended to draw out the heir of Slytherin. Understanding this, Harry felt a wave of relief wash over him. Since Blaine believed in his innocence, the damaging rumors circulating the school would likely diminish, alleviating Harry's greatest fear that Blaine might lend credence to the gossip. Given the circumstances, Harry said, standing up with renewed energy, "Mr. Blaine, if you don't think I'm responsible for all this, could you help me? Perhaps you could make another announcement to clarify things for everyone." "You mean to declare your innocence?" Atticus smiled knowingly. "Is that why you came to see me, Mr. Potter? I thought you might be here to report someone like Filch." Harry felt a flush of embarrassment. He knew his request might be denied, but he pressed on. "You must know that because of my ability to speak Parseltongue, everyone believes I attacked Colin, Fenrir, and Mrs. Norris. Wherever I go, people whisper." He trailed off as Blaine's smile faded, and he shook his head. "I understand your predicament, Mr. Potter, but I cannot grant your request," Blaine replied calmly. "Just as I won't assume you're the attacker based on rumors, I can't assure everyone of your innocence without concrete evidence. That would be irresponsible, Mr. Ray. Potter, I hope you understand." The weight of Blaine's gaze silenced Harry's plea, and his next words made Harry tense once more. "Moreover, there are matters you need to explain to everyone. For instance, on Halloween night last year, when the first attack occurred, why were you, Mr. Weasley, and Miss Granger in the third-floor corridor after attending Nearly Headless Nick's Death Day party? It's quite perplexing." End of this chapter. Chapter 34. The Twins' Plan. Atticus Blaine watched as Harry Potter, looking somewhat disappointed, left his office. Harry had hoped to uncover secrets unknown to outsiders, but Atticus wasn't surprised by the outcome. At Harry's age, young wizards were often in a sensitive phase, especially those from Slytherin. If Atticus were in Harry's shoes, he would have no reason to divulge what he knew, especially when Headmaster Dumbledore seemed to trust a stranger over him. However, the recent interaction confirmed to Atticus that Harry was concealing some crucial information. If Atticus could access this information, it might change the current passive situation. "Perhaps I should find a way to earn his trust," Atticus mused, staring at the flickering light and shadows on the ceiling, his brow furrowed in thought. What if the heir never revealed themselves? Atticus had considered using a polyjuice potion to impersonate Colin or Justin, spreading rumors that the attacked students had awakened and provided key clues about the attacker's identity. He could then show his face as the impersonated person and hide in the school hospital. It was a clever plan, but flawed. If Colin and Justin hadn't seen the attacker's true face when petrified, the plan might not intimidate the culprit. "Just wait and see," Atticus murmured, withdrawing his gaze. He moved his fingers toward the monitoring wall, and the curtain opened silently. Staring at the shifting figures on the wall, he muttered, "If there's still no progress, the only option might be to align with the protagonist group." Meanwhile, Harry, having left Mr. Blaine's office, headed towards Gryffindor Tower. Initially, he intended to share the conversation with Hermione, but upon reflection, he realized there was no urgent need to rely on her keen insight. He had already grasped the critical point. Mr. Blaine wouldn't easily believe the school rumors and wouldn't imprison anyone without concrete evidence. For Harry, that was sufficient. He decided against telling Mr. Blaine about the eerie voice and Dobby's warning. Since Mr. Blaine refused to clear his name, sharing these details wouldn't change the outcome and might only make him appear more suspicious. Harry believed that if anyone needed to know, it should be Headmaster Dumbledore. As Harry passed through the doorway behind the fat lady's portrait, he noticed several Weasley children, except Percy, sitting on a large, soft sofa under a bright crystal chandelier. Upon seeing Harry, they immediately showed expressions of relief and waved to him happily, warming Harry's heart. "Well, Harry, did that Blaine give you a hard time because of Filch?" Ron asked, standing up and handing Harry a glass of pumpkin juice. "Better than I thought, Ron," Harry replied with a grin. 20 minutes later, after Harry recounted the entire conversation, the Weasley family, who had been tense with worry, visibly relaxed. "Oh, that Mr. Investigator seems more intelligent than we thought. George, it seems we need to adjust our plan," Fred muttered, looking slightly disappointed. "We were going to show him some color." "Don't worry, Fred," Harry cautioned. "Mr. Blaine isn't a showman like Lockhart. He's not that easy to deal with." "Trust in our expertise, Harry," George said confidently. "We never miss." "What are you planning?" Ron asked eagerly. "Throwing dung bombs into his office?" For the time being, Ginny's pale and haggard face, which looked as if she hadn't slept for half a month, regained some color, and she let go of her hand covering her chest. However, it didn't take long before her breathing became short again, and she looked very nervous. "That Mr. Blaine said he was monitoring the school, but how did he do it? I mean, he almost never steps out of his office." This was indeed a puzzling question, and Harry couldn't answer it, but his intuition told him that Mr. Blaine was not lying. They discussed this issue for a long time, and the final conclusion was still uncertain. "It seems that we still have to go, Fred." At the end of the conversation, George raised his eyebrows and smirked at his brother. "Of course, George, there's probably no one else who would take the opportunity to sneak into his office except the two of us." Fred winked at George. After everyone had left, Fred whispered to George, "Do you think Blaine will have a share too?" "Shut up, Fred," George said hurriedly, glancing at Percy, who was struggling to climb into the lounge. "We can figure this out tomorrow." On Tuesday morning, the third-year Gryffindors had a spell class taught by Professor Flitwick. Today, he was introducing a spell that could make people laugh, the Happy Charm, to the young wizards. At the end of the casting action, your wand needs to be slightly raised upwards. "This is very important, gentlemen and ladies," Professor Flitwick said sharply from the podium. "Otherwise, when you wake up, you'll find yourself lying on the floor with a black-haired baboon standing on your chest." "What are you two thinking about?" Angelina noticed that Fred and George were not practicing spells with each other at all, but were instead peeking at a piece of parchment. On the yellowed paper, there were many densely packed words moving back and forth. "Peeping privacy is a despicable thing, Katie. I don't want to have a despicable person as my teammate," Fred said, turning his head away from Angelina's sight and then quietly signaling to George. George, who received the signal, immediately shook a piece of orange candy from his sleeve. "If I die because of this, Fred, remember to bury my body in Filch's office," George said with a smile. 3 minutes later, the noisy classroom fell silent amid a series of eardrum-piercing screams. The bright red liquid ejected from George's 2 nostrils at the same time stunned everyone. Professor Flitwick ran over. When he saw George's predicament and the large bloodstains on Fred's robe, he also fell into panic. "Fred, oh no, George. Well, whoever you are, can someone explain to me what's going on?" "He's going to die!" Fred supported the pale George with grief on his face. "Can you allow me to find a place to bury my dear brother?" "Nobody dies, Weasley," said Professor Flitwick angrily. "Take him to Madame Pomfrey to deal with it. If there is time, I hope you can come back and practice the Happy Charm. This lesson is very important, Weasley, because—" Flitwick stopped before he finished speaking, because after hearing that he allowed them to go to the school hospital, the 2 Weasleys immediately jumped up vigorously and rushed out of the classroom without looking back, leaving nothing behind. Professor Flitwick stood disheveled in a large pool of blood. Because it was class time, there were very few little wizards wandering around in the castle. Fred and George, with George holding his nose, ran all the way. When they reached the 4th floor, Fred suggested that he investigate Blaine's office by himself and let George go to the school hospital. "We haven't got an antidote for that, George, and maybe it'll make you bleed out. Don't do it alone, Fred. You can't. Take all the credit for yourself, George exclaimed as he dashed up to the third floor, clutching his bloody nose. Based on their observations over the past few days, Atticus Blaine would only leave his mysterious office between 10:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., and again during unspecified hours in the afternoon. During these times, he would head to the prefect's bathroom for a relaxing bath to relieve his fatigue before hurrying back without delay. To the twins' surprise, breaking the protective spell on the office door was far easier than anticipated. A simple Alohomora spell was all it took to unlock the door. Fred and George slipped into the room, crouching low. The office was sparsely furnished, with nothing particularly noteworthy catching their attention at first glance. Standing before a black curtain, Fred and George exchanged excited glances. "Let's count down from 3 and unveil this mystery together," Fred suggested eagerly. End of this chapter. Chapter 35. Please tell me this is not a dream, George. As the black curtain was drawn back, a dazzling array of lights and shadows unfolded before the twin brothers. Atticus Blaine's office, which they had so proudly infiltrated, left them momentarily speechless. They stood there, eyes wide with disbelief, much like muggles witnessing magic for the first time. Their expressions were a mix of awe and absurdity. "Sorry, brother," George Weasley murmured weakly, blinking rapidly as he tried to comprehend the extraordinary invention before them. "I can't promise you anything, but I think we've uncovered how Mr. Blaine is spying on Hogwarts from his office. It's insane." "Yeah, that's crazy," Fred echoed, his voice tinged with astonishment. He glanced down at the parchment in his hand, words floating across it, then shifted his focus to the grid of images. His breathing grew heavier. "Our map can't compare to this. I still don't understand how he does it." It took the twins nearly 10 minutes to shake off their shock. Once they regained their composure, they rushed to the wall, eager to embed their eyes into its surface. George, too excited to notice his nosebleed, ignored his increasingly pale complexion and dizzy head, focusing solely on analyzing Mr. Blaine's groundbreaking invention with Fred. "I'll bet you Percy's prefect badge, Fred. There's some advanced transfiguration involved," George said with reverence, his fingers tracing the wall as his eyes darted around. "There must be an alchemical device transferring images from various parts of the castle to this transformed wall, restoring them into understandable pictures." "More than that," Fred exclaimed, his voice loud with excitement. "Look at the perspective of these images, George. He must have installed hundreds of alchemical devices for surveillance throughout the castle. What kind of magic can achieve such remarkable functionality?" The twins stood before the wall, engrossed in their discussion, analyzing the possible technical means behind the system. They concluded that the monitoring equipment employed multidisciplinary magical knowledge, far beyond their current understanding. "Do you think if we ask him sincerely, he might teach us how to make this?" Fred asked hopefully, staring at the screen. Suddenly, the map he held, once a treasured possession, seemed inadequate. "There's a question, brother," George said, covering his nose with a grimace. "If Mr. Blaine has been monitoring everyone's actions from his office, does that mean—" The twins exchanged a glance, realization dawning on them. Mr. Blaine might have witnessed their late-night escapades, sneaking out of the lounge and wandering the castle last week. "He didn't report us to Professor McGonagall. Maybe he was asleep when we were out," Fred speculated, though he struggled to believe it himself. Regardless of why Mr. Blaine hadn't exposed them, now wasn't the time to ponder it. They remembered that Atticus Blaine would return to the monitoring room in about 10 minutes. Drawing the curtains, Fred held his head while George, still dizzy, moved to the door. As his hand touched the doorknob and twisted it, his expression turned somber. "Here's an interesting thought, George," he said. "I can't wait to share it with you," Fred exclaimed, his eyes alight with excitement. "I'm eager to hear this intriguing information from you, Fred," George replied, squinting as he rubbed his forehead. "But I hope you can wait until I'm lying on Madame Pomfrey's hospital bed before you share it with me." "I'm afraid we can't wait that long," Fred said, twisting the handle of the door with determination. Yet, as expected, the bronze-colored doorknob remained stubbornly immobile. "I think we've been ambushed." A heavy silence settled between them as Fred and George exchanged awkward glances, each recognizing the absurdity of their situation in the other's eyes. The secret room they were tasked with investigating, under the school board's directive, was supposed to be monitored by an experienced wizard. How could such a wizard be careless enough to leave this crucial room unguarded? 10 seconds later, their self-rescue operation commenced. George disentangled himself from Fred's support, drew his wand, and aimed it at the doorknob from 3 feet away. With a determined look exchanged between them, they shouted in unison, "Smashed to pieces!" A shimmering light flickered across the round doorknob, only to fade back into stillness, leaving the door unchanged. "Damn it, this cunning guy!" Fred cursed through gritted teeth. He planned to catch any young wizard who dared to break into his office. Undeterred, Fred and George tried several more times, but their efforts were in vain. Every spell was thwarted by the powerful defensive enchantments on the door. Fred glanced anxiously at the parchment in his hand, contemplating the most primitive method, forcing the door open. "Stop doing stupid things, Fred," George urged, scanning the room until his eyes landed on a window near the forbidden forest. "Come and help, brother. Maybe we can escape through there." "Are you crazy, George?" Fred exclaimed, eyes wide with surprise. "This is the 3rd floor. I'd rather be caught by the investigator and handed over to Professor McGonagall than jump and break my neck." Despite his words, Fred followed George to the window. After another round of futile efforts, they collapsed to the ground, utterly defeated. "Can you imagine, George?" Fred said, raking his fingers through his hair in frustration. "Who would put a protective spell on a window?" Meanwhile, Atticus Blaine emerged from the prefect's bathroom, his hair still damp. He seemed to be in high spirits, even humming an off-key tune as he passed the statue of Boris the Bewildered. To be honest, he regretted not asking Professor Snape to make him a prefect during his school years. Being a prefect came with privileges that ordinary students could only dream of. The entire floor of the long-used room was paved with luxurious snow-white marble, and the large, swimming pool-like bath was enough to inspire envy. The only downside was the portrait of the sleeping mermaid on the wall, who always seemed to peek at his muscular 8-pack abs when he closed his eyes to meditate, leaving Atticus feeling somewhat embarrassed. With just 2 minutes left before the students finished their classes, Atticus leisurely made his way from the 6th floor to the 3rd. Finally, he flicked his wand from his sleeve and stood at the door of his office, a smile playing on his lips. In a soft voice, he declared, "Now, let's unravel the mystery of the culprit." End of this chapter. Chapter 36. Let It Go. In Atticus Blaine's office, Fred was earnestly explaining why they had broken in, while George lay on Atticus's bed, moaning softly in a daze. Fortunately, after Atticus administered a recovery potion mixed with poisonous tentacle seeds, George's nosebleed finally stopped. "Professor McGonagall did warn me to be cautious of you two," Atticus said, sitting in his office chair with an expression of bemusement at Fred's explanation. "She mentioned that if I caught you wandering around the castle at night, I shouldn't be too surprised. However, she failed to mention the possibility of you breaking into my office. I must say, you two are quite lucky. Considering that the person who opened the Chamber of Secrets is likely an underage wizard, the magic I have set up here is primarily for confinement. If I had followed my usual practices from outside work," Atticus continued, looking sternly at the ghost-like Weasley brothers, "Headmaster Dumbledore might be writing a letter of condolence to your parents right now." Even without Atticus's warning, Fred and George realized their actions had been reckless. They knew Atticus Blaine was not a professor at the school, and barging into his office without understanding his temperament was a mistake. George, looking pale and exhausted from the blood loss, managed to sit up from the bed with a pleading expression. "Mr. Blaine, for the sake of the lesson we've learned, could you not mention this to Professor McGonagall? We promise this will be the last time." Fred nodded vigorously in agreement. "Please, Mr. Blaine. While we were trapped here, George and I decided to turn over a new leaf. We plan to become model students who love learning and follow the rules. Can you let us go?" Atticus rolled his eyes, almost amused by the pair. Did they really think he was that gullible? "Well, anyway," he said, not giving them an immediate answer, He leaned back in his chair, crossing his fingers on his knees, and looked at them with a half-smile. "You two have figured out my secret, haven't you?" At this, George's expression shifted from one of despair, and Fred dropped his pretense of being reformed. Their eyes shone with admiration, and Fred couldn't wait to shower Atticus with praise. "You are the most talented wizard I've ever seen, Mr. Blaine. Even Headmaster Dumbledore can't compare to you," Fred exclaimed, lauding Atticus's brilliance. "The way you monitor the school is beyond anything we could have imagined." The brothers exchanged a glance, reaching a silent agreement. George asked respectfully, "Could you explain the principle behind it in detail?" "Don't even think about it." Atticus rolled his eyes again. Reflecting on Bill, who excelled in both character and academics, and Charlie, with his outstanding Quidditch talent, Atticus couldn't fathom how the Weasley family had produced these two. Yet, he had to admit, Fred and George were quite entertaining. When Atticus refused their request, George flopped back onto the bed dramatically, feigning deep hurt. He reached out to his brother with a weak voice. "It seems my last wish cannot be fulfilled. Fred, if you ever figure it out, remember to tell me at my grave." In the end, Atticus did not divulge the principles behind his monitoring system to the twins. It wasn't out of selfishness, but because the explanation was too complex to convey in a few sentences, involving many profound transformations. Magic and alchemy were complex subjects. Even if Atticus Blaine explained the principles, the twins wouldn't grasp them, let alone replicate them. Despite this, Atticus was generous enough not to punish Fred and George for sneaking into his office, as they had no involvement with the Chamber of Secrets. "Remember to keep what you've seen a secret, you two," Atticus warned, his eyes narrowing and his voice carrying a chill that made Fred and George shiver. "If I find out you've leaked this secret or tampered with the surveillance I've set up in the castle, even Headmaster Dumbledore might not be able to intervene." "We swear on Percy's prefect badge, sir, that we won't breathe a word to anyone," the twins promised in unison. "Let's hope they keep their word," Atticus thought as he lay down to rest. He knew deep down that it was unlikely the Weasley twins would keep the secret entirely. They would probably tell Harry, and Harry, in turn, would share it with his close friends. However, Atticus trusted that the Weasleys wouldn't let the information spread beyond that circle. His initial misjudgment meant he had to spend more time uncovering what could have been discovered quickly. That night, as Harry and Ron returned from the school hospital, Fred and George quickly pulled them aside in the common room. They led Harry to a secluded spot near the stairs to the girls' dormitory, where they could talk without being overheard. As the conversation unfolded, Harry's expression grew serious, while Ron's mouth dropped open in shock. Unbeknownst to them, a pale figure stood silently at the stairway, listening before retreating into the shadows. "Wait here, Ron," Harry said, suddenly understanding the situation. He dashed to the dormitory to retrieve his invisibility cloak, knowing he and Ron would likely spend the night in the school hospital. Although it wasn't yet curfew, a few students still roamed the castle. Harry and Ron, now under the cloak's protection, moved cautiously, glancing at the corridors and ceilings as if expecting hidden eyes to watch them. "What do you think, Harry?" Hermione asked, surprisingly calm and cautious after hearing the startling news. She sat on her bed, arms crossed. Harry hesitated, his emerald eyes flickering with uncertainty. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I don't think it's entirely unacceptable." "Are you mad, Harry?" Ron exclaimed, unable to contain his thoughts any longer. "Didn't you hear Fred and George say that Blaine is spying on everyone without warning? If this isn't a violation of freedom, I don't know what is, and I bet Fred and George have been manipulated into thinking it's funny." "There are still many things you don't understand, Ron," Hermione interjected sharply. "Why can't you see it from Harry's perspective?" "From Harry's perspective," Ron echoed, bewildered. He glanced between Hermione and Harry, feeling as though his understanding lagged behind theirs. "Can someone kindly explain this to me?" Ron grumbled impatiently after waiting for a response that never came. "Is it really necessary to say, Ron?" Hermione replied, brushing a strand of her black hair away from her face, a new habit she'd recently picked up. "It's certainly not noble to monitor the daily activities of all the young wizards without prior notice, and it even skirts the edge of legality. But Ron, you can't deny that it's an effective method, can you? If it helps catch the heir of Slytherin, then all the rumors surrounding Harry will be dispelled, and he won't have to endure those ridiculous accusations anymore. Besides, do you think Mr. Blaine would resort to such measures without the approval of Headmaster Dumbledore and the other professors? At least if someone else gets attacked, this might prove my innocence, Harry muttered, feeling a pang of guilt for his selfish thoughts. I really don't want to be involved in this any longer. End of this chapter. Chapter 37. Suspicious Clouds. Time always seems to slip away quietly, and before anyone realized it, the first month of the second half of the semester had already come to an end. No matter how thrilling a topic might be, it can't outshine the mundane rhythm of daily life. Atticus Blaine, who had entered Hogwarts as a special investigator for the school board, initially stirred up some excitement. However, due to his low profile and the fact that 2 months had passed since the last attack, discussions about him quickly faded. Some even forgot that there were additional investigators from Slytherin at the school. Of course, some believed that the absence of further attacks was due to the deterrent effect of these hidden investigators. For Harry, this was the best possible outcome. People gradually stopped casting suspicious glances his way. By the second week of school, Crabbe, Goyle, Daphne, Pansy, and others had been reporting to Atticus's office about Harry's activities. Even Malfoy seemed to realize his antics were becoming tiresome and began to tone down his behavior. Another piece of good news was that Hermione had finally rid herself of the embarrassing black hair, and Madame Pomfrey informed them that Hermione would be officially discharged from the hospital over the weekend. Fred and George hadn't been their usual cheerful selves lately. Ever since they learned about Mr. Blaine's methods of monitoring the school, they were hesitant to roam the castle at night. Although Mr. Blaine appeared to be quite approachable, they knew he wouldn't tolerate repeated provocations. At 8 o'clock on Thursday night, Atticus remained in his office, watching as Harry and Ron returned to the Gryffindor common room, disappearing into the portraits on the wall. Nearly 3 weeks after his initial announcement, even Atticus had to admit that his first attempt had nearly failed. What should he do next? Should he release false news that the attacked student had regained consciousness, or should he continue to wait? Atticus stared at the photograph of himself and Grandma Farina on his desk, hesitating for a moment. The glass reflected a blurry but still recognizable youthful face, more haggard than before. He had to admit that he had underestimated the difficulty of this task and the patience of his opponent. His eyes shifted to the notebook spread out on the table, filled with complex spell model deductions, and the opened letter that had arrived that afternoon. The letter was from Cacus Foley. Dear Mr. Blaine, I'm very sorry to disturb you during your mission, but there is something I believe you need to know. Recently, an unknown force has emerged in the underground world, searching for the whereabouts and true identity of the Golden Viper. Out of curiosity and caution, I conducted a small investigation and discovered that their leader is the client from the earlier magical relic exploration mission. Currently, I have not determined their purpose in searching for the Golden Viper. Additionally, as far as I know, Lucius Malfoy has been active recently and seems to be planning to expel Albus Dumbledore from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Your faithful, Cacus Foley. Atticus rubbed his fingers together, his expression serious, as his deep eyes scanned the brief words on the letter. A group investigating the Golden Viper. This was indeed intriguing. Who could it be? Atticus pondered quietly. He had been active in the underground world under the alias Golden Viper for over 3 years. To be honest, for various reasons, he had made quite a few enemies. If there was anyone who held a life-and-death grudge against Atticus Blaine, it would likely be a pack of large wolfhounds, relying on their coarse fur and tough hides. However, since even Cacus couldn't determine their identities, it was clear that those investigating the Golden Viper weren't the bothersome werewolves, as they never bothered to conceal their identities. Cacus provided scant information, leaving Atticus unable to discern who was interested in him. For now, all he could do was remain vigilant, as there was no effective way to address the situation. Regarding the second point raised by Caucus, Atticus wasn't overly concerned about Lucius Malfoy's plan to expel Dumbledore. It seemed improbable that anyone with sense would believe Malfoy capable of such a feat. Caucus likely mentioned it as a subtle reminder. Malfoy and the Greengrass family had been staunchly opposed to sending investigators. If Lucius Malfoy did manage to temporarily remove Dumbledore from Hogwarts, it would mean his own swift removal, rendering the mission to uncover the secret of the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets a complete failure. With a soft sigh, Atticus rose and went to the bookshelf, retrieving a copy of the Daily Prophet delivered by an owl on Monday morning. Most of the genuine news in the paper revolved around entertainment, with only one article featuring Rita Skeeter's sharp critique of the Muggle Protection Act, which had been in effect for over half a year. However, Atticus wasn't interested in revisiting the biting words of a journalist known for her acerbic wit and sensationalism. Instead, he turned to page 7, where a small announcement caught his attention, prompting deep thought. Currently, recommended by the director of St. Mungo's Magical Injury Hospital and approved by the board of directors, Adele Foley has been confirmed as the head of the Strange Bacteria and Infection Department. Miss Foley joined St. Mungo's in September 1975 as a therapist and has worked in the department for nearly 9 years as of this report. Could this be why Caucus Foley was so determined to secure the commission to find the Slytherin treasure? Atticus's gaze intensified. Initially, he assumed the commission was issued by a school wizard or dark wizard, coveting Slytherin's secret treasures in the underground world. But now, it seemed more complex. Who could have issued this commission? Atticus's mind raced through a list of powerful Ministry of Magic officials, yet he couldn't pinpoint the answer. A sudden knock on the door interrupted Atticus's contemplation. He glanced at the monitor and saw it was Professor Snape. The demanding day and night schedule had been grueling, and on occasion, when Snape had free time, he would visit to help Atticus rest. However, he usually sent a message in advance, never making an unannounced visit like this. After returning to school, Professor Snape had shown a noticeable distance, which initially puzzled Atticus. But upon reflection, he understood. Snape might fear that if his old master returned, he could be ensnared once more. If too many people knew of their close relationship, Snape could be dragged down as well. Thus, Snape's deliberate aloofness was likely a means of self-preservation. "Still nothing new?" Snape inquired as he entered. Always in a hurry, Snape strode into Atticus Blaine's office. He glared at the lethargic young man seated behind the desk. Subtle changes flickered across Atticus's withered, sallow face. "Clearly," Atticus remarked as he stood up and stretched, his voice tinged with laziness. "Are you here to help?" "Headmaster Dumbledore wants to see you," Snape replied, his lips curling into a sneer. "Perhaps you should prepare yourself to be dismissed, Atticus." End of this chapter. Chapter 38. The Curse of the Dark Lord. Tonight marked the second time Atticus Blaine had entered Dumbledore's office since his arrival at Hogwarts after Christmas. As the saying goes, it's not the act of theft that one should fear, but the thief's intent. Atticus hadn't forgotten how Dumbledore had kept a watchful eye on him after his encounter with the Dark Witch in the Forbidden Forest during his 5th year. The circular office appeared much the same as it had over a month ago, with one notable change. The Phoenix, which had been a fledgling during his last visit, now boasted a magnificent coat of golden-red feathers. It was nestled in the brazier, its head tucked under its wings, undisturbed by Atticus's quiet footsteps. Dumbledore was engrossed in a letter when Atticus entered. Upon seeing the slightly weary young man, the light in Dumbledore's blue eyes softened considerably compared to their first meeting. "Good evening, Headmaster Dumbledore. I hope I'm not interrupting," Atticus greeted with a nod. "Professor Snape mentioned you wished to discuss something with me." "Indeed," Dumbledore replied, gesturing for Atticus to sit. A smile played on his lips, though his tone carried a hint of reproach. "Regrettably, Atticus, I can't offer you any fine wine this time. Besides, given your current state, I doubt alcohol would be advisable." Atticus smiled but remained silent, sensing the old wizard's underlying intentions. The pleasantries were familiar. Dumbledore expressed his gratitude for Atticus's dedication in safeguarding the young wizards by patrolling the grounds at night. He also subtly inquired about Atticus's well-being, suggesting he might need some rest. Could something have happened to prompt Dumbledore to consider expelling him early? Atticus wondered. "Thank you for your concern, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus replied cautiously. "Catching the attacker is a responsibility entrusted to me by the school board. I must ensure the safety of the students and will not abandon my post until the culprit is found." "Oh, such a noble sense of duty," Dumbledore remarked, seemingly touched by Atticus's words. He removed his glasses to wipe away the moisture. "Severus and Minerva have both expressed their concerns about your overzealous work ethic. They hope you won't be too anxious, even if another incident occurs. It's not solely your responsibility." Atticus frowned, puzzled. Had Dumbledore summoned him merely to express gratitude? "Especially Minerva," Dumbledore continued. "She believes that spending excessive time searching for the assailant without new leads is unwise. She mentioned during the Christmas holidays that she feels the defense against the dark arts professor I appointed is lacking, hindering the students' learning." Indeed, Dumbledore seemed to be harboring ulterior motives. The headmaster paused, looking troubled, while Atticus raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. An awkward silence enveloped the room, broken only by the gentle tinkling of Dumbledore's mysterious alchemical instruments. "Let me ask first, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus began after a long pause. Atticus Blaine was the first to break the awkward silence. "If I refuse your request, you won't arrest me and send me to Nurmengard or Azkaban, will you?" Dumbledore chuckled warmly. "Oh, of course not, Atticus. It's entirely my fault. I'm here to ask for your help. Honestly, sometimes I wish someone could handle my difficulties. Finding a qualified defense against the dark arts professor is much harder than discovering the 12 uses of dragon's blood." Atticus pursed his lips, his expression betraying no emotion. "There have been unconfirmed rumors about the professor of this subject, Headmaster Dumbledore." "I can't lie to you, Atticus," Dumbledore replied, his demeanor turning serious. He nodded thoughtfully. "Although there's no direct evidence, ever since I rejected Voldemort's application for this position, no professor has managed to stay in the role for more than a year." Atticus sat calm, not rushing to voice his opinion. "However, with 2 defense against the dark arts professors at the school simultaneously, and considering the teaching period is only a few months, I believe the risk is manageable." "If you think the risk is manageable, why don't you teach it yourself?" Atticus thought, rolling his eyes silently. "I can pay you for a whole year, Atticus, if you're willing to help those promising children," Dumbledore said earnestly, his tone persuasive. In the office, Atticus sat in his chair, deep in thought. He neither agreed nor objected to Dumbledore's request, simply stating that he needed time to consider it. The Dark Lord had cursed this position, and the curse's power had remained unbroken for decades, even beyond Dumbledore's abilities. It was clear that the Dark Lord had invested significant effort into it. During the Christmas vacation, Atticus had resolved not to accept such a risky and unpredictable job. However, he now had new considerations. Before receiving this task and entering Hogwarts, Atticus had assumed the commission would only take a few months to resolve. Otherwise, the Chamber of Secrets case would disrupt Harry Potter's adventures for the next school year. But reality might differ. Due to his intervention, the original storyline had likely changed significantly, meaning the predetermined ending had also shifted. If the heir was truly cautious, they might avoid provoking Atticus. If the heir was determined to outlast him, Atticus, who was passively waiting for clues, was almost certain to fail in this drawn-out battle. He couldn't remain at the school indefinitely for this matter. In this scenario, the information Potter's small team had gathered was crucial. If they could provide a key clue, Atticus was confident he could follow the trail and find the Chamber of Secrets before anyone else. He had also considered how to further gain Potter's trust. If he remained labeled as an investigator, breaking through the psychological barrier between him and Potter might be difficult. But if he changed his role, perhaps becoming a professor, things might become easier. At the very least, frequent interactions would foster a more amicable relationship. So, Atticus decided, taking a deep breath. He waved his wand to clear the cluttered desk. Let me experience your curse, Mr. Dark Lord of this chapter. Chapter 39. Atticus Blaine meticulously tidied up his desk, ensuring that even the candlestick and the cherished photograph of him with Grandma Farina were safely relocated to avoid any potential damage. Before proceeding with his task, he cast a glance at the monitoring wall opposite him. Hogwarts appeared tranquil, with nothing out of the ordinary occurring. With a sigh, Atticus returned to his bedside to retrieve his suitcase. After rummaging through it, he extracted a peculiar candlestick. The base of this candlestick was a voodoo doll, its eyes as large as a baby's fist, with bared teeth extending below its earlobes. The doll's head was disproportionately large compared to its body, which was black, and its swollen face bore a menacing smile. Atticus preferred not to ponder the materials used to craft this unsettling figure. He had acquired this alchemical item from a trading market in the underground world, sold to him by a wizard hailing from Ouagadougou, Africa. Among the countries with thriving magical civilizations, Ouagadougou was perhaps the most chaotic, likely due to the complex local Muggle social order. Many people there still lived in tribal communities, led by witches with ancient lineages. These tribal witch festivals retained many cruel and bloody spells passed down through generations. Cursing and sacrifice were their specialties, and even a powerful wizard like Atticus was wary of provoking these formidable practitioners. Atop the voodoo doll's head, the upper part of the candlestick was a transparent tube designed to hold candle liquid. Since the doll had not yet been used, the tube was pristine and unstained. It was time to create the candle liquid. Atticus reached into the box once more, and after a moment produced a bottle of scarlet dragon's blood. This particular dragon blood was sourced from a Norwegian red-scaled dragon that Atticus had slain. He had collected a substantial amount of dragon blood at the time, cautious not to draw the Ministry of Magic's attention with excessive use. As is well known, nearly every part of a fire dragon is valuable, especially its blood and nerves, which are rich in magical power and serve as excellent raw materials for potions and spellcasting. Atticus poured the dragon's blood into the transparent tube above the voodoo doll's head, observing the crystal-red mist that formed on the surface of the gently rippling liquid. He nodded in satisfaction. Next, it was time to make a small sacrifice. Atticus rolled up his sleeves, revealing his arms. A dark silver light flashed in the dim air, and the blood that spurted forth coalesced into a meandering stream under the influence of magic, merging precisely with the dragon blood in the tube. The ominous magic emanating from the office seemed to swallow the light, causing the candlesticks on the bookshelf, which usually shone steadily, to grow dim and dusty. Atticus's expression was solemn, and the two vortexes in his lavender eyes appeared to flow slowly. He continued to wave his wand, and black, tadpole-like runes emerged from it, filled with a gray light. These runes seemed to possess a life of their own, swimming in the void before Atticus and leaving faint ink marks in the air. "Go," Atticus commanded with a hint of authority. Hundreds of tadpole runes surged toward the mixture of dragon's blood and his own, like weary birds returning to their nests. Suddenly, a strange breeze swept through the quiet room. The tadpole runes propelled the blood into a spin, and tiny blood-red electric sparks occasionally erupted on the liquid surface, creating a startling spectacle. The magic that Atticus continuously infused into the concoction resembled a gray current, catalyzing the mixture with his own magical power. The magical energy contained within the tadpole rune gradually merged with the magic coursing through the blood, transforming the dragon's blood from a smooth liquid into a thick, viscous state. Before the blood could completely solidify, Atticus Blaine plucked a strand of hair from his head and tossed it into the mixture. At last, a bright red candle with a wick was formed. In the dim light, Atticus wiped away imaginary sweat from his forehead and relaxed his shoulders slightly, though his expression remained tense. With a sudden pong, the candle ignited, producing a nearly 3-foot-high golden-yellow flame encircled by a dark gray halo. From a distance, it resembled a fiercely burning torch atop a voodoo doll's head. Ordinarily, a candle burning at such an alarming rate would extinguish within minutes. However, the thick body of this peculiar candle remained unchanged, as if it consumed something other than the wax and wick. "It's up to you," Atticus murmured softly, his eyelashes fluttering slightly. He stood upright before the voodoo doll, raising the tip of his cane skyward with a solemn expression, his voice resonating with the weight of a vow. I, Atticus Blaine, voluntarily accept the invitation of the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Albus Dumbledore, to serve as an assistant professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. The moment the oath was spoken, the air in the office trembled violently. An immensely powerful and malevolent curse force, compelled to act, descended upon Atticus, transcending the barriers of time and space. In a daze, he seemed to hear the anguished cries of countless souls tortured and murdered. Meanwhile, Albus Dumbledore, seated behind his desk in the circular office on the 8th floor, was jolted from his contemplation. He turned sharply toward Atticus's office, his sharp blue eyes seemingly piercing through layers of walls, observing Atticus's actions as if he were present. As Voldemort's curse power targeted Atticus, it was diverted by a substitute he had prepared. However, once the curse power entered the voodoo doll, it realized it had been deceived. An enraged roar echoed in the void, and the curse's magic rapidly formed a tangible, expanding dark bubble. It enveloped the voodoo doll and swiftly approached Atticus. Despite the imminent failure of the magic meant to counter the curse, Atticus remained unperturbed. His eyelids flickered slightly, and his furrowed brows added a touch of majesty to his calm demeanor. When the curse was just 2 feet away, Atticus suddenly withdrew his raised right hand, pressing the tip of his staff firmly against the now materialized curse power. A powerful wind, born from the clash between the expanding curse and the potent magic emanating from Atticus's staff, swept through the office. Every inch of space was filled with fleeting gray lightning, and the images on the monitoring wall flickered due to the intense magical magnetic field enveloping the entire floor. The mysterious vortex in Atticus's eyes began to spin once more, and his entire body was bathed in a thin, almost imperceptible twilight. The magical energy absorbed by the staff's tip surged like a typhoon's tide, each wave more formidable than the last. As time passed, the bubble formed by the curse power gradually weakened, shrinking and being forced back into the voodoo doll inch by inch, and at the moment it vanished. A slender crack suddenly appeared on the towering nose of the grinning voodoo doll, and the once vibrant magical fire seemed to have taken a severe blow, now reduced to just a third of its original intensity. In the circular office, Principal Dumbledore wore a wry smile. He stood up unconsciously, then slowly sat back down, resting his hand on Fawkes' paw. Meanwhile, Professor Lockhart, whose office was on the 3rd floor, was preparing to sleep in the faculty dormitory. He breathed heavily, rubbing his eyes as if he had consumed a large jar of vitality tonic. "Oh, lucky little Nika!" Lockhart exclaimed with a satisfied grin. He returned to his desk, retrieved a flamboyant peacock quill from the penholder, and began writing with enthusiasm. "Congratulations on receiving my reply a day earlier." In a cluttered room, Atticus Blaine gazed at the voodoo doll, now etched with fine lines, and finally allowed himself a relieved smile. Author's note: apologies, everyone. I have a bid to prepare for on Tuesday, which means I'll be staying up late tonight to work on it. As a result, there will only be one update on Monday. I'll make it up to you when I have more time. End of this chapter. Chapter 40, Professorship. The last day of January coincided with a weekend, and the weather was splendid. The bright sunshine of the early morning cast a shimmering glow on the lake, where rows of willow trees along the shore were budding with new life. The green lawns swayed gently in the breeze, and the air was filled with a serene tranquility. On the Quidditch field, teams from the 4 major colleges, each clad in distinct uniforms, gathered to practice. After some challenging and intense negotiations, they each claimed a corner of the field to hone their tactics. However, to keep their strategies secret, only the steadfast Hufflepuff team revealed their true skills, while the others held back. Atticus Blaine had finally adjusted his biological clock after 2 days. Standing by the window, he gazed at the vibrant Hogwarts landscape, allowing the breeze to tussle his soft gray hair. He felt a rare sense of joy and resolved that any future commissions requiring night shifts would demand a premium above the market rate. As he strolled through the castle, the young wizards he encountered gave him surprised looks. It was well known that the investigator sent by the school board had habits akin to a bat, rarely seen during the day and preferring nocturnal activity. Spotting him in daylight was as rare as encountering a troll in the castle. In the great hall, a few late-rising students were scattered about, and at the staff table, Professors Flitwick, Sprout, and Snape were engaged in quiet conversation. Upon seeing Atticus approach, Professor Flitwick stood up and congratulated him warmly. "We were just talking about you," he said, lowering his voice. "We've heard the good news from Minerva, Atticus, and we all believe you're well suited for the position. The condition is that you show your true capabilities." "Atticus," Professor Sprout added with a smile, adjusting her patched and dusty hat. "Of course, even if you showed just a fraction of your strength, it would surpass some of the more sensational individuals." Atticus, respectful of his mentors, smiled and expressed his gratitude. Education is a vast and profound field. Having knowledge is one thing, but imparting it effectively to young wizards is another. I could never compare to the experience of Professors Flitwick and Sprout. His thoughtful compliment pleased them both. Flitwick turned to Snape, who feigned indifference, and remarked with a grin, "Severus, you must be disappointed. I can't recall how many times you vied for this teaching position, and now you've lost to your favorite student. Perhaps Severus is accustomed to such defeats?" Professor Sprout's playful jab made Atticus chuckle over his toast. Snape's expression darkened, and he retorted, "There's little to boast about in becoming a professor of this course, Atticus. The real achievement is stepping down from it unscathed. Just because you can't manage it doesn't mean I can't, Professor," Atticus replied with a smile, further darkening Snape's mood. After a pleasant breakfast, they parted ways, agreeing to meet at the Three Broomsticks for a drink when time allowed. Instead of returning to his quarters, Atticus headed to Professor McGonagall's office. This meeting had clearly been scheduled in advance. When Atticus Blaine knocked on the door of Professor McGonagall's office, she showed no sign of surprise. "Oh, thank goodness, you're finally here," Professor McGonagall exclaimed, pursing her lips slightly. Perhaps it was because the heir to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets had not caused any trouble and everything was in order, but Professor McGonagall appeared to be in a much better mood and complexion than during the Christmas holiday. "Anyway, Atticus, I must thank you. There are a few upper-class students who have always dreamed of becoming aurors after graduation. You know, to become an auror, one needs at least 5 Newt certificates, including Defense Against the Dark Arts. If they continue following Gilderoy's teaching methods, their dreams will be shattered before they begin." "I can only do my best, Professor McGonagall," Atticus replied with a wry smile, "but please don't expect too much from me. You know I've never been particularly good at taking exams, let alone helping young wizards pass them. Moreover, if the Chamber of Secrets incident is any indication, I definitely need to address that first." "Oh, we've all seen your abilities, Atticus," Professor McGonagall said, raising her chin with a hint of displeasure. "I think you need to correct your excessive modesty. As for the Chamber of Secrets, well, I can't handle that anymore. Let Headmaster Dumbledore worry about it. He should also do something serious." What could Atticus say? He could only continue to smile ruefully. "As for the division of work between you and Gilderoy, here's what I propose." When discussing work, Professor McGonagall's demeanor shifted to one of seriousness. "Currently, the students in the 5th and 7th grades urgently need your help as they are about to face the 2 most important exams of their lives. This is crucial for their futures, Atticus. I hope you can cooperate with Gilderoy. He will handle the teaching for students below the 5th grade, while you will be responsible for the 5th to 7th grades." Atticus groaned inwardly, but remained silent. Professor McGonagall's plan was indeed reasonable, but it conflicted with his original intention for accepting the teaching position. If he couldn't connect with a few key individuals in the protagonist group, then what was the point of his efforts? Regarding this matter, Professor McGonagall, I think it's best for me to discuss it with Professor Lockhart first. In the end, Atticus did not provide a definitive response. After leaving Professor McGonagall's office, Atticus went straight to see Professor Lockhart. With a new week starting tomorrow, he needed to finalize this matter by the morning and use the afternoon and evening to prepare. Even if his motivation for becoming a professor wasn't entirely pure, he wasn't willing to idly sit by and let his reputation become like that of Professor Lockhart. Speaking of Lockhart, Atticus couldn't help but feel perplexed. What kind of teaching method could earn unanimous, good reviews from all the professors and most of the young wizards at Hogwarts, to the point where even Professor McGonagall and Headmaster Dumbledore had to intervene? Apologies for the brevity of this chapter. I've been incredibly busy these past few days and didn't get home until 11 p.m. I haven't even had dinner yet. End of this chapter.